Thank you. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and this is the both the regular and the special meetings. We're holding them simultaneously, and we'll be moving through the regular meeting agenda. For those of you that aren't aware, due to a slight error on our part, the second page of the agenda was not physically posted at City Hall, and so it was posted electronically. And so in order to comply with the law, we are holding both our regular meeting with the agenda posted previously and also our special meeting, which has the identical agenda. And for the Pledge of Allegiance, who would like to lead it? Jason Walsh, great. Perfect. With gusto.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's the fastest one.
I like that. It's the only time of the entire meeting we're all on the same page. Can we have a roll call?
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Present.
Councilmember Agrimonti. Here. Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Hundley. Here. Mayor Harrington.
Present.
Thank you.
There will be a closed session at the end of today's meeting, so there's no report at this time. There will be after our closed session. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Oh, second?
Oh, roll call.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you.
And now on to comments from the public. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act, the merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged, please step to the podium, speak into the microphone, and begin by spelling your name and address.
Do you want that right now? Not yet.
I'm Dave Ransom. I live in Santa Rosa. I go to church in Sonoma. I'm sure we are all horrified by the fires in Brazil, Africa, Siberia, and Alaska, and what this is doing to our climate. I wonder what the kids are thinking. I suspect that, having been told that we have 10 years, they're wondering how old they will be at that time. I suspect that as life goes on without apparent concern, that they're wondering what the adults are up to. That certainly was the case for me when I was when I was a kid and teen during the Cold War, when we were shown pictures of houses being blown away by atom blasts and whole of old Navy fleets being destroyed by H-bomb blasts on atolls. When we saw in Life magazine pictures of kids who were disfigured by the aftermath of the bomb in Japan and were dying, we were having experienced all that. We were told to get under our desks if there was going to be an atom blast. We laugh about that today, but it was frightening at the time. It was frightening because clearly the teachers had no idea what was going on, and the adults were going about life as if nothing had changed. That's part of the reason we rose in the 60s, because we couldn't depend on the adults, that generation, to do what was required. We've had our own fires here. I drive from Santa Rosa to Soma regularly, and I see denuded hills, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang, and nothing is changing up there. But I want to suggest a simple way that we can respond to this. Government can issue a state of emergency, recognize the problem, tell the kids we know it's going on, and then we can have a campaign to plant trees. This is pretty simple. Plant trees, reforest. If the other forests are going, it's our responsibility to reforest our own forests. We can be a model in that.
Thank you, Dave.
Is that all? That's all I get?
That was great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll give you the rest next week.
Looking forward to it. Anyone else? Seeing no one come forward, I will close public comment. And are there any dedications for this meeting? No? None? Okay. Now on to the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, the council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Are there any council members who want to comment on this? No? Members of the public?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to remove item 4.3 for
Okay.
separate discussion.
Thank you. And with that, do we have a motion on items 4.1 and 4.2? Yep, 4.2 is the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Can we get a roll call?
Vice Mayor Harvey,
Yes.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Yes?
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you.
And I will turn it over to the city manager on item 4.3. Or maybe is it David Storr,
Yes,
planning
annually.
director?
Yes, thank you. Annually, the city comes, the staff comes before the city council to adopt the GMO, the allocations on an annual basis to establish the carryover from the prior development year. The development year is April 1st until September, basically, April through September. And what we've done this year is what we've done since 2005, I believe it is provide you with the numbers, which does a lot of subtraction and addition of the units that we've built in the last development year, if you will, and then carry them over to the next year. And the resolution that we have has the particular numbers for you to review, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great. Are there any council questions? I will open it up to the public for comment.
Thank you. Larry Barnett, 637 Fifth Street East. I'm familiar with this process. We did it for 12 years straight when I was on the council, and so it's quite a customary thing to do. I'm getting up merely to bring attention to the fact, and particularly to bring public attention to the fact that what we're talking about here are pipeline projects that account for 200 homes. I don't think people realize there's a lot of clamor nowadays for, we need to do more housing, we need to build more housing, particularly affordable housing. But between this project, these three allocations that are in the pipeline and which will probably get to their permit stage within the next year, there's 200 homes represented. In the other parts of the city right now, up on Napa Street and Spain Street, if you add those together, it's probably close to another 100 units being built. So that brings us to approximately 300 units. Of course, 20% of those will be under the inclusionary requirement, affordable units. But I do think it's worth council consideration, particularly as you get into discussions of development code and general plan policies, to adjust the inclusionary requirement for all of these projects to have not just 20% allocated to 80 to 120% of the area median income, but also provide a certain number that must be for lower income levels. And this, I don't think, is a complicated adjustment. Developers aren't going to like it because the costs, of course, are going to be the same and the return on that investment will be somewhat less. But these are potentially large developments. They could account for as many the 200 that are in the pipeline for 40 affordable units, and I think at least 25% of those ought to be in the lower income category, not just reserved for moderate and slightly above average or area median income. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this?
Hi, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I was going to pull this item as well, and I was going to have a similar comment to Larry. My comment was a little bit different in that these projects look to me like they're kind of more of a business as usual type of development that will only have the inclusionary requirement. And I agree 100% with Larry that 120% AMI as affordable is not acceptable for the city. That needs to be adjusted so that you have all four categories of very low, low, moderate, and above moderate in equal proportions. And I think, and I know from the Housing Our Community series that there's a sweet spot for an inclusionary requirement above which the developers say they can't afford to do it. And so the reason why Steve Ledson said he didn't mind the inclusionary requirement in Sonoma, because it was all 120% AMI. As soon as you start to bring that down, then that might start to get out of the sweet spot at 20%, and the developers are going to be agitating to make it 15 or 12 or more like the county. And so if you think that the median income is the median, and so 50% of the people in the county make that. So if you have a 20% inclusionary requirement, that means there's a 30% displacement rate for the people who can't afford to live there, who are actually 50% of the population of the county. So that starts to make Sonoma, increasingly more high-end. And so I have a concern that the business as usual projects like Mockingbird Lane there end up coming through at mostly market rate, and then you have this high inclusion. I think you should do that like at your next meeting, is get rid of that 120% AMI. So I'm concerned that the proportion and the fair share of the regional population is not being met by Sonoma or being met by the RENA numbers, and that the real numbers are 50% AMI of who are the people in the county. And so the more that Sonoma doesn't meet that, then the more Sonoma starts to become more and more high-end, which it already has. So I think that's a concern of mine, and I would like to see these housing units conform to the Housing Our Community aspiration that of 750 units over the next 10 years, of 50%, which would be deed restricted affordable housing. So I'd like to see that worked into all these machinations of the general plan and the growth management ordinance, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
You might consider indexing the percentage affordable to the actual need.
Thank you, Dave. Anyone else?
David Eicher, E-I-C-H-A-R. Of course, everyone's throwing around this AMI. That means area median income. That means half the people make more and half the people in the county make less. So by definition, if you're at 120% AMI, then less than half the people can afford the house. And that is the low-income housing. Less than half the people can afford the low-income housing. So I agree with the previous speakers. We need to take a look at reducing that and allowing more inclusionary housing at the lower levels. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? And with that, we will close public comment. Are there council comments? Or is there a motion? Vice Mayor Harvey?
I would say I broadly agree with the speakers who rose to speak about us changing our inclusionary requirement to include some requirements that we do provide housing for lower income people as well. I think it's an important piece. I think that the 120% AMI bracket is it serves a good portion of our middle class in the community. I think sometimes for two people living in a house, that may be a little bit too high or too low for some of the middle class people to reach, but I think that we do need to start doing more to take care of our lower wage workers, and we do need to include requirements that builders not build just at the 120% level when they're building their required affordable housing unit. And that's something that I definitely have interest in pursuing as a member of the council for sure. This isn't necessarily what we're moving on this, but I express support for that.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure that we're sticking to the agendized topic so that we don't have a Brown Act issue. But Councilmember Hundley.
I will talk about the growth management ordinance, but it is related. I think that, coming forward with our housing action plan, and I think you have to look at the whole picture holistically and see how it all is going to fit together. And inclusionary is going to play a piece of it. Things that the city built has a piece of it. Just how we plan our city and what our code is like and what our density is like. That's all going to have a piece too. So it's like a big, complicated picture. And another piece of it is our growth management ordinance, and I'm not sure that the way that is written, that it prioritizes things that we find to be helpful. So I think that as a part of this process, we're also going to be looking at this to see how we can, sort of use this as a tool to get things that are helpful to us. But with that, I will make a motion to adopt a resolution distributing growth management allocations for the 2019-20 development year.
Second.
Roll call.
Vice Mayor Harvey,
Yes.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Great. On to item 5.1, public hearing. Consideration, discussion, and possible action to introduce the reading of an ordinance amending Title 19 of the Sonoma Municipal Code relating to the rounding up/down of numeric calculations that do not result in whole units, relating to density and other similar calculations where rounding is not otherwise outlined for development projects located citywide, and finding the ordinance exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the CEQA Guidelines General Rule.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. David Storer with the Planning and Community Services Department. I'll introduce Christina Tierney here. She will be making a short presentation and a PowerPoint, but before that, just to let you know we are passing along a slightly modified ordinance for your review tonight. It just had a couple of typos and we wanted to clean them up. Christina's going to talk to you a little bit about the need for the actual general plan amendment and the zoning ordinance changes that we're proposing tonight, which have indeed been reviewed by the Planning Commission. They recommend approval of the general plan amendment and the rezone. Christina.
Thank you all so much. Is that on? Thank you all so much for your time tonight. Before you are a general plan amendment and a zoning code change to address how we as staff implement numerical calculations on a regular basis. When we get a project before us, a development project, one of the first things that we do is review it for consistency with the general plan and the development code. And many of those requirements involve doing calculations for density, FAR, site coverage, various things like that. Currently, neither our general plan or our development code provide specific directions on how we as staff are supposed to interpret those calculations when they don't result in whole numbers. So before you tonight are two changes. The first is to the general plan, and it's really providing specific directions to look at the development code. And the changes in the development code are providing very specific directions for every single one of the various calculations that we do. And the general intent is to provide clarification for developers, for homeowners, for the Planning Commission and the City Council, to try to make it as transparent and clear as possible as how staff members are looking at interpreting each of the calculations. Oh, I skipped around. So the edit before you on the screen is for the general plan, and we're inserting one sentence that states that density is calculated pursuant to Sonoma Municipal Code Section 1902020, Rules of Interpretation. This is an existing code section already, and This addition is really just to provide direction when anybody is looking at our general plan as to where they should look in the municipal code. The development code amendments are located in the rules of interpretation, and this is really boring, geeky planning stuff here, but it provides directions for how to do calculations for minimum lot size, for residential density, floor area ratio. The provisions for calculations of affordable housing are really just pointing to our existing code section. And then there's other provision for calculations that are not encompassed in the above subsections. That's about it. Sums up my staff report. Are there any questions?
I don't know if Miss Tierney has ever appeared before us before. I don't think has she? I don't think so.
Probably not. I think
So I
the
thought
planning
maybe you
commission,
could introduce
planning
her.
commission, I'm sorry about that, yeah. Christina's one of our associate planners, been with us around the same, 2 weeks before me.
All right. Well, great. Thank you very much. Are there any council questions? Councilmember Hundley.
So given that these things weren't specified, how have they been done in the past? What guided staff as they did these things?
I can only guess. There's a couple of documents, one in the housing element where we can see evidence of rounding up, but we can also find evidence of rounding down, so we don't quite know what happened in all of this. Yeah, it's the planning director's call at that point.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I will take it out to the public. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this matter?
Thank you, Mayor. Larry Barnett again. This came up not too long ago before the Planning Commission as an applicant for development on a parcel on Spain Street had been working with city staff prior to Mr. Storer's hiring and had been given the indication that a lot split would be fine. Subsequent to that, as the changeover in planning staff occurred, he then discovered through the reinterpretation of planning staff of our ordinances and codes that in fact his parcel did not qualify for a split and he couldn't build two houses. He was, this is to give you some background as Councilmember Hundley asked. This was an indication certainly to the Planning Commission and to the staff that this was an issue that needed to be attended to. It was frustrating for the applicant who had already spent a significant amount of money on development plans for the site on the assumption that he would be able to split the lot. But the hands of the Planning Commission were essentially tied through the opinion of the city attorney and the planning staff at the time, who said, well, there's really no legal justification for approving that lot split without the development of specific formula and language pertaining to a rounding up formula. So this is the result, I think, of an issue, a real issue that came up with a real applicant and represented an unclear process that the previous planning director had used in order to round up. And I think it'll be very helpful to the Planning Commission going forward to have this kind of clarity. And we certainly appreciate the recommendation of staff to clean this up.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnett.
Hi, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East again. I'd like to ask for an example from Christina of how the rounding up, how many units that might affect on a density bonus and an affordable housing project. Is it rounding up just one unit, so you're at like 4.75, so then you go to 5, or how many are we talking about when this pertains to affordable housing?
Anyone else? Ms. Tierney, do you want to address that?
The provision in the code before you now, the proposed change is not actually a change to our current density, to our current affordable housing regulations. It's really just providing directions to applicants and the Planning Commission that when they are looking for rounding, that they're supposed to look at Chapter 1944 for any rounding provisions related to affordable housing. So, for example, our inclusionary housing says at least 20%. So we would be looking at anything below 20% would need to get rounded up in that case.
Thank you. I can't remember if I officially closed public comment, but public comment is closed, and I will bring it back to the council for discussion. Is there anyone who would like to make comments on this?
So I guess I have a couple of questions. So if I'm understanding correctly, for a minimum lot area, number of lots, if we're splitting, we're doing lot splitting, then it's any fractional number is rounded down to the nearest whole.
The way that it's written right now is 0.9 and up, we would round up. And so
Okay.
the example that Commissioner Barnett brought up was for a project over on 700 West Spain. So they met every single development standard, minimum lot size, setbacks, everything in our development code, but it resulted in a density of 1.9 units. So in order for us to approve a 2-lot subdivision, they needed to have enough lot area to achieve a density of 2 units. And so previously, planning staff had indicated that informally they would round up from 1.9 up to 2. And we're taking a much more pragmatic and literal approach lately, and therefore we felt the need to amend the development code prior to making interpretations like that.
So why was the number 0.9 chosen and not something lower than 0.9?
It's the most conservative approach. I think if the commission or planning commission, city council decides in the future they want to change it, that's something we can look at through the development code amendment process.
Yeah, it seemed to me when there's been a lot of discussion about increasing density and things like that throughout Sonoma. So it would seem to me that a lower number would be kind of more where we'd want to go. I don't know if we'd want to go to a 0.5, but 0.7, 0.8 definitely seem comfortable to me, especially when we're looking at density bonuses and things like that. I mean, it's only maybe one more house or something like that, but I think that those kinds of definitions can actually lead to really big changes as far as how much housing you're able to get. I don't know what the rest of the council thinks, but 0.9 seems like overly cautious, overly conservative. Maybe it's something that we need to look at in a more detailed manner, but...
Councilmember Hundley?
Well, it seems to me if the, what you're talking about is more related to the policy of where density requirements are and how, from that policy side, which I think we should look at, whereas this is, you could keep changing whatever the requirements on that side, but this is just sort of the number, but.
Well, it's not though, because it's, 7,500 square foot lot, can barely divide into, so it can go into 2 lots, right? It's at 2.66. So if we had said the number was 0.6, that could be 3 lots, which would be 3 homes rather than 2, right?
Or you could change the size of the required lot.
Sure, but this policy would also affect that. So, I mean, either way, I just think it's...
I think the fundamental thing that you're talking about is what should the minimum lot requirement be fundamentally, which should not be achieved by having rounding achieve that. That's a separate policy discussion. I think that is a general plan discussion about how you want the town to look, and I think it requires quite a bit of thought about what the minimum lot size should be for a variety of reasons, and I would not feel comfortable doing that here. I think what we're talking about is when something is very close to the current rule, that we have the small discretion to sort of move project forward that makes sense, not change the rule kind of through a backdoor by allowing rounding at a lower number. So 0.8, 0.9, they're probably both very similar, but if we want to have a discussion about what the minimum lot size would be, which I think we should do as part of the general plan update, I think we should do it at that time, personally.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a fair point. I just thought it was kind of interesting. Okay, rounding, usually you're above 5, goes up to the next number, but then to choose it at 9. Okay, so it's about the rules, and that makes sense. Cool.
And I think it's also just about, precision for the staff, but then also sort of seeing 0.9 being so close, it just, it seems like, they're so close. But then when you get down to 0.2, suddenly you're inching further away. So it's like, where is the line where you want to decide it's fair for people to get close, but not quite? So I don't know. I don't particularly have a preference between 0.8 and 0.9. I go by the recommendations of our experts, but I'm open.
Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, I guess my only question is what's in the pipeline right now, and the timing of this. It sounds like if this passes tonight, that will there be projects that are in the pipeline that will resubmit, or will this be something that we'll just be able to add on to?
Well, we do have one project in particular that is eagerly waiting the passage of this. In general, the reason we chose 0.9 is that it's not going to make a material difference it's not going to take lots that would be previously unsubdividable and make them developable. That would be a big change that would require CEQA review. At 0.9, we would be approving lot splits that still meet all of our development code standards. The lower we get, the higher the chances that we're changing the development potential, and that's a bigger question.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve the development code adjustments as suggested by.
The formal motion is a motion to introduce the ordinance.
Motion to introduce the ordinance.
Thank you.
Second? Or, go ahead.
Was that a second?
I don't know. Go ahead. Is there a second? It's fine. I will second that. Can we have a roll call?
And did that happen after I read that long resolution the last time? That we just take the skipping?
That was a swan song on reading those, yeah.
Vice Mayor Harvey,
Yes.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Yes?
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
I remember.
All
And
right.
and the second action is a motion to approve the resolution amending the general plan.
So moved.
So seconded.
Roll call.
Vice Mayor Harvey,
Yes.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Aye?
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay. Item B. General plan amendment. Consideration, discussion.
That's what we just did.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you. Now on to item 6.1 of the regular calendar, interim update and initial direction on timelines, milestones, and sequencing of long-range planning efforts, including updating housing element, regional housing needs, allocation numbers, urban growth boundary update, general plan, and related process items. David Storer, take it away. Or
Maybe-
is it you, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm just going to make just a brief comment. So council and Mayor Harrington and members of the public, we're glad to be back in front of you to continue this important conversation. If you recall, we had a study session on July 29th, and there were, so we had kind of what I'll call a general plan 101, talked about housing elements and also the UGB, and we talked about coming back and kind of working through some timing and sequencing issues. So this is kind of a continued part 2, and with that, I'll turn it to our planning director, Mr. Storer.
I'm going to try to figure out how to get the PowerPoint working here in a moment. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation that we're handing out at the moment. As Kathy said, we were before you to talk about some introductory items with respect to the development code, zoning code, the general plan, and the urban growth boundary matters that are before us. In our staff report, you'll see I focused your attention, or try to focus your attention to the housing element component of the general plan. As we speak, we're beginning a cycle, if you will. We're in our 6th cycle of doing our housing elements in this particular region, the ABAC, the Association of Bay Area Governments area, where we'll be getting a relationship with them and HCD over the next 18 months to 2 years. Our current general plan, as I've noted in the staff report, covers a period of 20 years. As a 2020 general plan that was adopted in 2006. But the housing element within that general plan covers a period from 2015 to 2023. So before that time, at least 18 months after ABAG gets its assignments or determination numbers from HCD, we need to adopt a new housing element. So we're working backwards from that. And basically between now and the spring of next year, we'll be receiving information and participating in meetings with respect to receiving our regional housing needs allocation, which is derivative of the regional housing needs determination that's provided by HCD to ABAC. ABAC will give us our allocation. And somewhere during that point, we as the city can determine if we're going to become a part or have a relationship with the county and other cities within our county to see if we're going to become or form part of what's called a sub-region, where we can have perhaps more local control over determining what our regional housing need allocation will be. The general plan, there we go. The general plan is a document that survives a period of, let's say, 10 to 20 years for the most part. We've had, as we mentioned to you previously, we've had about 5 general plans during our lifetime since general plans first became a part of the 1960s culture. And the housing element is the only one of the elements, of the mandatory elements of a general plan, that's required to have a timing mechanism. And that's basically to remain current and fluid as a community evolves, basically trying to figure out how are you going to build a certain amount of housing within your community. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the timing of that general plan / housing element process as it relates to the amendment of our development code and also the discussion we're having regarding the urban growth boundary. So tonight we'd like to get some feedback from that. We will be recommending in later on in this presentation that we establish a time when we can have a joint planning commission meeting with your city council where we can talk about the timing of the housing element update and identifying certain areas within the development code that can make life easier for planners. And we've actually just experienced one of those tonight. As you know, a zoning code can be amended any time it chooses at the volition of the community. And in case you don't remember, we've actually updated it on wine tasting and also cannabis most recently in the last 6 months or so. We also would like to get a prioritization from the council tonight and have a discussion regarding other long-range planning projects, and we've identified some of those for you in the staff report. For example, next year, we're to be adopting thresholds for VMT analysis, which is another discussion that could be a part of our circulation element of our general plan. We also have an interest in dealing with economic development impacts that we can certainly include in a general plan update. And as you know, we have actually updated our general plan recently, not only tonight, as far as policy language, but we've also adopted a relatively new transportation element, circulation element in 2016. So tonight, as we talk about some of these other things, I've now provided a few of those for you. We also have issues relating to the timing of the creation of a historic train district. Your council gave direction on that earlier this year, and we plan on starting that during this last quarter. We also want to be talking about sustainability, those transitions between Public Works Department and ourselves, and the Planning and Community Service Department have already begun with the CSEC. We also need to be dealing with issues relating to the downtown parking area and commencing that. We also have some other implementation issues with respect to commercial cannabis, and you may also recall that we're in the throngs of dealing with 3 use permits through the development cycle.
I think, Council, part of the conversation, again, tonight, and we can continue this, really is, again, the prioritization and sequencing, because you can see from this chart, these are basically city initiatives we want to do, plus then we have our development processing projects that are coming through the pipeline. There's a lot going on here, so we can't do it all at once. We want to be able to do it well and have enough outreach. So that's part of, kind of this conversation of how do we want to sequence, and getting some of your thoughts on that.
I think just one of the things that's difficult about this slide is that all of the topics require different levels of staff work. Like the historic train district is much less intensive than the urban growth boundary presumptively. And so given that they're all shown just visually at equal size, it's hard to know how to sequence them since they take different, maybe there's information later about how much time each of them takes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We struggled. The point of the slide was really to provide council. This is really the things that are probably on a 2-year, the general plan being longer, but kind of a 2-year work plan. So there's a lot here. You are right, Mayor Harrington. There's some things that are a little more bite-sized, but there's some things that are 9-month projects, and there's some that are 2-year projects. Some we're going to have to hire some consultants for or find contract staff for. Some of this work, so that's part of, I think, and some of this may be better doing in more of a kind of a workshop format in a different room where you can put things on a whiteboard in a different way with Planning Commission or a retreat with the council. But part of the purpose of this slide was to really kind of in a snapshot give you a dashboard of all the pieces of work that are out there. all of these are important to, I think, each of you and the community in different ways, but we can't do it all at the same time. We can't do it at once. And so we do have to do some kind of sequencing and figure out how we move forward. And there are some places where we are up against hard deadlines, hard deadline in the housing element, potentially, you know, a hard deadline a little bit with the UGB. There's a hard deadline that council set with some of the cannabis stuff. So there are some of these, and some could take longer. So I appreciate your comment, and it's a piece I think that, again, this is kind of a status update, looking for initial feedback, and then honestly, I think we're going to have to do a little more retreat format and have an ability to have a different kind of facilitated.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, and as we've just discussed there, for example, if you see the big plus sign on the right-hand side, the current processing of permits and the like, we certainly anticipated that the cell towers would have been over by now as far as the 3-use permits in the commercial zones, yet that's had a continued life as we've gone through various design iterations with the applicants. This slide here is attachment 6, which just basically shows how ABAG is going through its process for planning the Bay Area for 2050, and how, and you see their dates are in the darker gray or light gray, I think it is. And then you can kind of see the state guidelines that everybody's under as far as local agencies go with respect to the release of the regional housing needs determinations. And so you can see that in the item number 22, you can see that by December 2022, that'll be when we, the local government, the city of Sonoma, will need to have a new housing element adopted by that time. And it's basically an 18-month time period from when we actually get those numbers from ABAG. So as we look at the concept of doing work over time over the next 18 months, and we certainly circled back to your council with the SB2 funding and trying to get some assistance, financial assistance, as Kathy was talking about, getting some bodies to help us do some of this work. You can see the steps that are necessary, and I think it's important for us to get started on the vacant land analysis, or I call it a suitable lands analysis. We can call it whatever we want. At the end of the day, we need to be doing this on a regular basis. It hasn't been done that I'm aware of since 2015, and it's supposed to be done a little bit more frequently than every 4 or 5 years, because your housing audit itself is a 5-year document. The point being is it needs to be a non-static document where we're constantly evolving and looking at sites that could be used for the development of housing, in addition to other sites for other uses. And so the first step that we have here is having money and staff and time to prepare that document, to figure out where sites are available with respect to whether they're vacant lands or whether they're underutilized lands. Certainly the state of California, when we try to match that to our numbers that we've been granted or given, that we try to make sure that we have that ability to deal with that and have a plan on how to then convert those underutilized lands if we don't have any vacant land itself that's available. We've also identified here, in tandem with our Planning Town series events, creating a housing action plan, ultimately a housing element, and then possibly even a housing specific plan at some point in the future. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you. And so with the urban growth boundary that we addressed at the last meeting, we've had that discussion initially on July 29th. We're here tonight to talk about the concept of having a joint planning session with the Planning Commission where we can talk about the urban growth boundary, whether the language stays as it is, the boundary stays where it is, and do we meet or not meet a March or a November timeline. We've recommended having that joint session, should the council feel that that's an appropriate strategy, and also then having further community input similar to the ones that we have for the town hall series, maybe one where we spend some time on a weekend trying to figure out how to get the community involved to discuss the urban growth boundary plan itself. This also then shows, this next slide here shows the timing. Down the left-hand column you have the events that are necessary or suggested, and also the columns in the middle, which identifies a March 2020 election and a November 2020 election on the right-hand side, and how those things can or cannot be accomplished. I will point out that one thing that we haven't plugged in here that I'm sure you're all aware about, and that would be the environmental review that would be necessary. Should there be a desire on the council's part to do something other than just keep the language as it is or make some minor editorial changes here and there to make it easy to read, with keeping the boundary as it is, we could probably get through with a categorical exemption similar to some of the other environmental documents you've seen on some of the ordinances that we've recently passed, where the issues are de minimis, if you will. With respect to wanting to change the boundary, change the language that has some flexibility in it, you're looking at an initial study, and I'd be kind of crazy not to suggest that at a minimum it will be a negative declaration, but more than likely, depending on the scope and the size of the changes that the council would be interested in, that flexibility more than likely would require an EIR. The point being here is that those are not only costly, but it's also a problem when it comes to timeline, as far as certainly meeting a March election timeline. And then even, I think personally that, and as staff, we've talked about this, that would create a problem for even November if we had to do something with respect to an initial study or an EIR.
Maybe just one piece, and the city attorney can comment on this too, but again, if council is placing an item for consideration by the voters and related to the UGB, it would require environmental analysis. If a similar, could be the exact same thing or it could be different, is a voter initiative placed on, it does not require any environmental analysis. So it's just, there are higher requirements on you as an elected body in terms of environmental review than there is if it is a citizen initiative. So sometimes agencies will be able to come together and create something that that the citizens are willing to kind of carry forward and move that through as well. So there's different ways this can be done, but there are some idiosyncrasies in the way the law is written.
The last slide just kind of recaps some of the brief comments that I've made already with respect to a discussion of the council and certainly the public to talk about the prioritization and sequencing of certain things. Certainly one of the conversations I've had with many of the members of the community is the need for amending the development code. We saw one example tonight. There are several others. My perspective in reading it is it's probably one of the most awkward and complicated zoning codes that I've read. As far as trying to be able to navigate through it, it's not an easy document to go find things very easily, and you have to kind of go search for it. That therein should be a litmus test for the planning world that we need to make some changes, and it has not been addressed, at least in a wholesale or comprehensive fashion, since 2002, and that would be our recommendation. So I've mentioned in the staff report that the general plan has some great goals and policies and even implementation measures that we don't really need to fuss with. But at the same time, we can certainly be strategic in making sure, we do have to make sure that any development codes that we introduce have to be consistent with the general plan. You have to have that relationship, and that takes a lot of thought and process. We would like to get feedback on UGB timing, whether a March or a November election is that desire of your council. And also we'd like to talk a little bit about the initiation of the vacant land analysis or the suitable sites analysis for the housing element, and also with respect to a housing action plan as well. Again, staff also recommends in this presentation that you direct a joint planning commission city council meeting to deal with the UGB specifically, and also to get feedback from the commission on its desires regarding the general plan and development code timing as well.
And just one thing I'll add, it's really not part of this item, but council did already direct us to sometime this fall, do a joint council planning commission meeting on kind of CEQA and more of an education 101. It's going to be too much to put all these together, but I think that is a piece that we'd want to, it's not, I just want to let council know it's not off our radar screen, and it's a piece that we want to make sure we weave in this fall as well.
Great. Are there council questions about this presentation? No, I will take it out to the public for public comment.
Hello again, Larry Barnett. First of all, I want to say I would very much welcome the opportunity to have a joint council and commission study session or meeting about this whole topic of general plan and development code. I think it deserves a very thorough conversation. As you could hear from Planning Director Storr's presentation, it is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and making sure that the pieces fit together well are important not only in terms of the application of the plan's consistency, but also in terms of legal implications. The city doesn't want to find itself having drafted something that ends up easily challenged in court and leaves the city vulnerable to a lawsuit because of poor connection between the development code and the general plan. I had the privilege or the opportunity to participate in 2 general plan updates. One was happening before I was elected in '94, and the other one took place while I was on the city council. One of the reasons I applied to be on the commission was to be able to bring some historical perspective and some institutional memory to the process. That's really the fundamental reason I applied to be on the planning commission. Making decisions about sausage stores on the plaza was not the highest thing on my mind, although it's a pleasure to do that too. Insofar as the sequence is concerned, at least in my experience of the 2 updates that I've participated in, the general plan was always considered to be the goals and policies document from which the development code implementation measures and regulations flowed. And therefore the sequence was important in that in order to make sure that the implementation and regulations are in line with the actual goals of the general plan update was done first. And that's the way it was done the 2 times that I participated. And it made sense to me in terms of sequence because of the flow of goals and policies to regulations and implementation measures being a logical process and fitting together equally. I don't dispute the characterization of the development code as inordinately complex. It's very difficult to work with it, and you have to go to multiple places to just get a sense of the consistency of a piece of information. Insofar as the UGB is concerned, I think the timing is partially out of your hands. It's going to expire in 2020, and I don't believe the citizens, at least as far as I'm aware, are going to allow it to expire. There's going to be a measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Johanna Patry, 621 Napa Road. I'd like to commend staff on the report as I consider it a clear and informative expression of the matters and priorities before you, not an easy task. I want to express my concern for the timing and importance of renewing the urban growth boundaries, as time is of the essence. With a 64% voter approval in 2000 of the current UGB, it should not be allowed to expire in December 2020. The current UGB is almost contiguous with the city limit boundary lines, with the exception of a few parcels at the fringe of the city limits. It makes sense from a land use planning perspective to retain this consistency to prevent urban sprawl, encourage development within the city center core, and retain this sustainable small town rural character. Staff has provided you with some working time frames, and I'm asking the council to heed those time frames in order that the city places a ballot measure no later than the November 2020 general election, in order that the citizens may vote to renew the existing UGB for at least an additional 20 years before it expires. Since 2000, the establishment of the UGB by the voters, the city and its environs have been subjected to intense growth pressures. And while that growth has left behind an inadequate affordable housing stock, it has not been demonstrated factually that the current UGB is to blame for the affordable housing crunch. It is because of such factors as the dynamics of the real estate market itself, the conversion of existing housing stock into other uses such as vacation rentals and wine tasting to serve the tourist industry and not the local residents, and the lack of new housing stock. Furthermore, the public is most likely not aware that in compliance with state law regarding the provision of affordable housing, the council may amend the UGB boundary based on specific findings and substantial evidence of the need. We believe with critical analysis, research, land use planning, and design, including rezoning, city policies can support inclusive and diverse affordable housing stock and ensure equal housing opportunities for all. I would suggest that the inventory include underutilized parcels, not only vacant parcels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vic Conforti, 755 Broadway. Did you get copies of numbers that I put together?
I don't know. Do you have copies?
Yeah, I do.
We can start this time after we get the handout. Thank you.
This is just a, in support of including these underutilized or underdeveloped parcels in the city. There are quite significant numbers related to that, kind of the second block of numbers. The first section on the housing element, this is sort of the existing numbers that are in the housing element in the general plan, excuse me, of close to 800 units that are opportunity for housing. These underutilized, underdeveloped parcels are also a very significant number. That's when you take the underdeveloped and then there's some others converting rural residential zoning, housing over large parking lots, and serious incentives for ADUs. The numbers approaches the number in your housing element opportunity sites. So it could practically double that number that's shown now, and the development of those numbers is going to take a little thought, because it's not obvious, because there are, in some cases, these are parcels where there's existing developed parcel that buildings, excuse me, and parking areas or poorly utilized areas that could be developed with housing, or even more complex things like putting parking in an existing, or excuse me, in a situation where there's units over the parking. As an example, the Staples building, I designed that years ago as a Ford dealership. I designed the building so it's tall enough that it can accommodate a second floor, thinking about mixed use at the time, with the housing there. So there are other examples of where the buildings would just, the parcel would be entirely demoed and start fresh, and there are other examples where there's buildings that could be converted into housing, or housing added around them or above them. So including those numbers is going to be a important aspect for both the UGB and the housing element then. Thank you. And thanks staff for excellent job in terms of the presentation this evening. And also the citizens, I think, would like to help you get the UGB on the ballot. If it's better if we do it than you do it because of the EIR impacts, we'd be happy to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Vic.
Hi, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I recall the first UGB meeting when David Goodison was still planning director, and David went through and said we should have a discussion about the UGB. And I met with him later, or I think he did even say at that meeting that the provision for pushing the edge of the UGB was impossible to satisfy. And so there's a certain segment of the UGB there that, maybe, I want to talk about process really more than content at this point. So that was starting the process out, and then Kathy said that last January would front load the UGB onto the general plan process. But now it's 8 months later, and people have been talking about all kind of content, but there hasn't been any kind of formal process to lay out anything like that David has laid out in General Plan 101 and this, and you can see that the number of the public that showed up here is extremely thin. So as I look at that process and I see the Housing Our Community series was 3 meetings that was, just barely able to lay out the affordable housing issues in 3 meetings with a consultant. I don't see how in the UGB process 1 public meeting is going to cover it. Because I've been studying this myself for a year or more, and I'm learning stuff about it all the time, and 1 public meeting I don't think is enough. So I would suggest that there would be 3 UGB public meetings and maybe get a consultant like Jim Hyde or somebody, or that could be a neutral consultant that would mimic the Housing Our Community process, that would then take all those planning bullets that David had laid out and look at it as a package. And I understand that from David Goodison's first meeting, he said that the UGB is the thing that sets the stage for the rest of the general plan. So it's important to get that set so you can work on everything else. So the Sonoma Valley Housing Group has proposed to have a 2-year extension to the UGB process. And I think in particular to address the language there that he said was impossible to satisfy. If that's going to take an initial study, then that puts a tension in between the citizens' idea of having the citizens' ballot, which has come out right from the start that there would be no discussion on that's already set, and that's set as the same exact content as the UGB that it was. So that makes the whole discussion of it moot, which I find to be a really lousy public process, that no one has a chance to say anything about it. We have a hard deadline. We're going to do this. And I just don't think that's right. And I only have 1 second, so thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
David Eicher, I think you need a clone staff to take a look at that. You have lots on the plate. But anyway, in terms of the UGB, I think you should shoot for the March 2020 ballot measure. And you may not hit it, but the reason is if you just want to renew the UGB as is, and that's fine, you can put it on the November ballot. But if you're looking at changes and it's going to require an EIR, then you're adding time to that process. And EIRs can get complicated. I've seen them go back and forth. And so if you think you're going to do the November ballot and you start with some of the public meetings and the process a little bit later, then you might get up to the point where, kind of like with the cannabis, we're on this deadline and you had to meet on a Sunday to do the second reading. Then you're cramming things in and you may not get everything in that you want. So I think try to aim for that to be on the earlier side, with shoot for the March to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Ransom. You know, I have a foot in 2 worlds. You know, I live in Santa Rosa, but I go to church in Sonoma, and in Sonoma that means that I represent to a certain extent, the congregation. And we have a spiritual action group, which I'm a part of, and that's a part of the Sonoma Valley Housing Group. And I stand in church relatively often and talk about city politics and what we're doing with city politics, and I get a very sort of interest. But last Sunday I stood up and I talked about the UGB and the community having a voice in it, and all of a sudden everybody was watching. And I asked, how many folks in here live in the city? Rather, I asked how many don't, and 2/3 of the hands went up that people live in the Springs or Temelec or the East Side. And as a Sonoma Valley Housing Group, we are particularly concerned that the whole community be a part of this process. This is the only city in the county that has where only 1/3 of the population lives in the city. 2/3 lives in the surrounding area. Most of that surrounding area is zoned residential by the county. Some of it, a good deal of it, is zoned urban residential. And I think that both the urban growth boundary and the general plan need to be thinking in terms of how do we get the whole community involved. That would include the county. I don't know how you can do that, but there are joint power agreements about things, and there must be joint processes for reaching those joint power agreements. And we would very much like to see a period of time, 2 years, discussion where we can discuss the urban growth boundary and the general plan as a community.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mayor Harrington, members of the council. I passed out a colorful little map. It kind of piggybacks onto what Victor said. And I'm glad to hear that part of this plan is a vacant lot or suitable land map or study of the city of Sonoma. Because I'm encouraged that actually what will happen is through that process you'll discover that there's adequate land if only the policy directions were in place to utilize and produce the amount of housing that we need within our city limits. There's no reason to go outside of the current city limits to meet our regional housing need, even if it is updated by HCD. This map is just simply an example of underutilized lots that are on West Napa Street that through the proper policy direction, in and of itself, with almost 15 acres of land, could produce near 300 housing units. Very small strip of land, but available land and activated by the correct policies as updated in the general plan and implemented by the development code. I believe that the UGB should remain in its place. It should go on the ballot. We should vote on it and see what the community thinks. A 2-year process of delaying it is going to delay all the rest of the process. And I think it will also trigger an EIR, which in and of itself will be a year-plus process. So, in short, affordable housing in our community has always been subsidized. We lost those subsidies when the redevelopment agency went away. There hasn't been an affordable housing project produced in our community where the land has not been underwritten in some form, usually through the buying of the land by the city. And the developer, the affordable housing developer, received that grant of land and were able to produce housing because that subsidy of land was given to them. That's how affordable housing has been produced in California, and that's why we're in a shortage right now. When I moved here in 1988, the hot topic was affordable housing. At that point, interest rates were 10.5%. When you looked at a $250,000 house on 2nd Street East, it cost $2,500 a month to own it. Today, a $500,000 house is $2,500 to own it because our interest rates are at 4%. So things really haven't changed that much. The one thing that really hasn't changed is wages haven't changed in 30 years.
Thank you.
Good evening, Carol Marcus, 873 First Street West. Good evening, Council, Mayor Harrington. I'm a little concerned about the possibility of a 2-year extension and the position that it puts you in and the citizens in. And I guess I would like some clarification. If it were allowed to expire, if it expires in December and we go for an extension, then it's my impression that it would just take a 3-2 vote to make exceptions to the general, to the urban growth boundary. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's, and I don't think that's a position you necessarily want to be in, and I don't think that as citizens that's a position that we would favor. So, thanks.
Thank you. Can staff address that question?
Yes, so as council, I think, is aware, and basically the UGB stays in place But as of the end of December 31, it changes where January 1, the city council could make changes to that UGB boundary without having to go back to the voters. So basically, up until December of 2020, the council can't make any change because it would require a vote of the people. But after January, the UGB still sits there. It doesn't evaporate. It doesn't go away. It's still in place, but it does the authority to potentially change it and modify it goes to the council instead of the people.
Thanks. I didn't make a last call for public comment, but was there anyone else? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and I would like to take a 3-minute break before we bring it back to council for discussion. Thanks. All right, so now it's back, public comment is closed, and it's back to the council for consideration and discussion, direction to the staff. I have a question for you, Kathy, just about the item 1, general direction on prioritization. Now, is that going to be done, given our earlier discussion about whiteboarding it or whatever's going to happen?
Yeah, this first one really is more, and I went back and forth. I almost had feedback here, kind of not necessarily like, what are some initial thoughts you have on this? It would just be helpful to get a little bit in your brains to understand a little bit of what your thoughts are in terms of priority and sequencing. That will help us as we then, one, prepare for the joint meeting with the planning commission, et cetera. So be helpful to get some good, and if you don't know, you don't know, that's okay too. But again, in order to move some of these things forward, we've got to go get some consultant assistants or some contract staff, and we've got, again, with SP2 money, we've got some money. So there's some ways to do some of this, but part of it is getting a little bit of clarity of what that looks like, what you want, what you think you want to be doing, so that we can be kind of starting to do some research and get some things kind of partially teed up.
Okay, maybe I can start. So I'm looking, would you mind putting up slide 3? Thanks. So with regard to these items, did you want some comments on these or only on the, no?
You're welcome to give any feedback on this as well. We were thinking more, kind of the top, what I'll call bucket, the top, or the top box, the general plan update. Again, we did put the urban growth boundary kind of in a separate box with it, and housing policy is somewhat in both. But if you've got general comments, happy to take any of it.
Okay. All right. You don't have to leave this up if you don't want to. I go back to the final slide, whichever you like. So I guess my thought is, I do think, given the timelines we're working under, perhaps the November election is the best election to have the UGB on. I think my initial thoughts, although I'm certainly open to, robust discussion about them, are that even if the UGB is approved put on the ballot and approved for 20 years, you could still put on a second measure in a shorter time frame to change it, and so it could be extended for a longer period, and then after the general plan is updated, you could continue to have discussions. You wouldn't necessarily need to just have it a shortened period. Even if you wanted to change it in 2 years, you don't necessarily have to set the time period as 2 years on the ballot. So I think that's somewhat persuasive to me as an idea. If there was some other reason to have it on the March ballot, I would also be open to that idea as well. Who did the last vacant land inventory? Do we know?
Well, it would have been the consultant. I don't recall the name, but it would have been done somewhere around 2014.
Oh, okay. So I think the vacant land inventory and securing the staff is a good idea. I'd like to know how much that costs and who would do it, and the housing action plan. Is there somebody in mind to do that?
No, I think it could be, we've not really, there's definitely firms you could do. So part of the issue here is if we're going to roll into and do a broader general plan, and maybe you're just going to do some tweaking and updating to the development code now and you're going to wait on that, then you might be starting to think about hiring people who are going to work on some of these front pieces that are going to carry you all the way through your general plan process.
Yeah.
So that we're not training a new consultant. That's not what we want to do. I do think, there's also, with the vacant land inventory is more of a planner analysis per se. The housing action plan there's analysis, but there's also an important community engagement piece. I do think that we felt that Jim Hyde, who we worked with on the housing action, was a good consultant having both those two pieces. There could be other people that do that as well. But again, we want to make sure that when we're doing these community engagement, that it is interesting and different and engaging for the community.
Yeah. Thanks. I think it is my preference that we address the general plan update prior to doing substantial development code rewrites. And one of the things, although we are intensely focused on housing, I think it's really important that we also have a commercial, like an understanding of development of commercial spaces as well. And one of the issues they face in the spring specifically is that they don't have the commercial tax base to support the amount of housing they have there. They have like all housing, and that, you know, I think that we should have a broader discussion about how to encourage mixed use. Our current general plan calls for mixed use all down Broadway to encourage walking, to get parking off the plaza. I don't think we've done a particularly great job encouraging that, and we have waived it, and you know, and I think that would really serve the town well. So I think in addition to talking about housing people, we have to talk about economic development of the town, how we will develop. So I'd like to see those two things together and not totally unchanged from each other when we talk about updating the development code. The other thing I think about updating the development code one by one is it seems like we might wind up having a number of the same policy discussions over and over and over again, and I'd rather have the policy discussion once and then have the code changes to follow versus having the code come at different times and have that same discussion over and over. So and I absolutely want to have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. I think that's important, and I'd like to see them doing a lot of the general plan work, and I really want to, not that this is happening, so this is not a criticism in any way, but I want to make sure that the Planning Commission, we have so many talented commissioners, that they are used to the full extent of their abilities to vet things and bring things forward, and I think that'll be really helpful, and I'd like in that joint meeting to understand what each body's role is in the general plan update process, so that we're not duplicating or you know, that that the Planning Commission's really doing independent work, so that we're not doing the Planning Commission's job. That's very important to me. So I think that's it. Is that the list?
Yes.
Great. Okay, Councilmember Hundley.
All right. As far as sequencing, so absolutely, I want to have the UGB on the ballot before it expires in December of next year. But I also think that to have the community process that it deserves, that I do not want to rush it to get it on March. I would like to aim for November, with the idea that this was going to be, there's going to be room for a lot of participation. Because some of the reasons is, I'm thinking about it, the year that this current UGB was adopted, I was 17 years old. So it's literally been my entire adulthood that it has been. And I think that it is good, even if we end up exactly in the same place again. There's an entire new generation of people to be involved in it. And I think it's good to know, what's that? I think it's good to know why you have what you have, and not just because that's what you have. So it's something we're talking about. I forget how old you are. You were probably like 12 at the time.
11.
Exactly. So, I mean, I would think that, you know, looking at this timing here, and it kind of has it so that it's like a continuous thing up until the, like, when it could be filed. But I would say shoot for, you know, a little bit earlier. One, because then it would be check that box off. But two, I feel like then it would be, you know, people in the community can feel confident that this thing exists, because we're not going to wait till the last minute and then just try to slap something together. There's certainly a lot of things coming up, and I think that meeting with the Planning Commission will be really interesting to talk about some of this. You know, the note about the development code part, you know, my entire experience on the council has been, I would say, drowning in appeals related to development code problems, and I don't really want to do that for 4 more years. So I think that there are some things that probably have already been identified that could just be like fixed, so we could just stop fighting over them. And then also, so I think it's more of like quick fix kind of things rather than these huge philosophical discussions, because, you know, after this whole general plan process update, you know, I want to have a code that's like tight and effective, and like everybody's expectations are the ones that they see before them, and we can move forward in a more peaceful coexistence with planning. And, well, just some of the parts I'm excited about. So the Economic Development Strategic Plan, going to your point about wanting to know about sort of the other important piece that kind of keeps it all funded and the roads paved. I think there's so much to learn about our city, and we don't know. And so there's a lot of things with the general plan that informational things that like also need to be happening next year. And so I just wouldn't want to like set those back on the shelf because 2017, when I was mayor and Kathy, like first day on the job, I was like, let's do the general plan this year. And you know, there's a lot of preparation that has to come in, things that needed to be taken care of in front of that. So, but I just want to keep moving forward on that. And is there anything else?
Yeah, what about the vacant land inventory and housing action plan?
Well, I mean,
kind of
that's one of the
no-brainer.
things that I just don't want it to get pushed back because of too much of trying to focus too much on one thing, because it's such an important tool to have, you know, from the general plan. Because then, you know, going back to the discussion earlier about the growth management ordinance and all of that, like this will like actually like be able to help the pieces, and we can just, you know, no longer talking about things that are isolated. We can like have a plan for it. So that I mean, of course I support that because I've been working on it. And I think that's it.
Great. Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, I kind of felt like the biggest question tonight was for the council direction as far as if March or November. My direction would definitely be November. I think March would be a little bit too early. I do like having the Planning Commission joint meeting. I've been at a couple of those. They're kind of concerning because by time everybody goes around and talks once, 2 hours goes by. So I'd really like to see the direction to staff to try to make sure that the Planning Commission is heard through that process. And it might take a couple meetings, not sure. What I would really like to see is more movement towards this, because I know it's going to take a long time. And I would like to see some numbers next to it. I know that we have money set aside for this, but I'd like to see the consultants, and probably answering the question tonight that I would think I would want November would probably help with that process, meaning that we wouldn't have to hire somebody immediately, and we can take some of this out to bid and use some of that. And I'm definitely for doing a vacant land inventory analysis and housing action plan. But I guess my biggest question tonight is, when will this come back to the council as far as looking for more direction after tonight?
Well, I think I need to wait and hear what the full council is going to say to kind of get a sense. But, you know, if there tends to be some agreement on some general approach, then I think we can do some thinking about, you know, kind of, again, how to get some of the staff support to do it. Because, again, the reason I put that dashboard on is there's all of these things are super important and sometimes sensitive, but we've also got the cannabis regulations and the cannabis process, which is also comes out of this department, and that, you know, and then the cell towers are taking also an inordinate amount of time. So so part of it, I think, our goal, I think, would be to get a meeting with the Planning Commission within the next 60 days, and that we can hopefully come forward with some ideas and kind of more refined process that you all could be considering at that point.
And I guess my last comment would be, I do agree with my colleagues that we should be heading towards the UGB before we're trying to clean up a lot of stuff out there. And hopefully, I've been on the council for 6 years, and I know that the gray areas that were written into a lot of our ordinances was because times were different back then. But now we're in where everything needs to be, you know, cleaned up. So I would like to see that cleaning up happen during this UGB process as much as we can. I know that we do have some stuff out there that we have to do a little bit of housekeeping with, but that's my direction.
All right, who's next? Vice Mayor Harvey?
That's kind of my feeling that vacant land inventory is going to inform some of the UGB discussion. UGB discussion is going to inform the general plan update. General plan update is going to inform development code. So I think that's kind of how it should flow. I'd like to see the development or the vacant land inventory done before we have the UGB, because I think that's going to be relevant and pertinent information during discussions and during any community outreach that we do. I totally support going to November 2020 so that this can have the UGB discussion can have the time that it deserves. I appreciated, I believe it was Fred Albach's comment that we should have more than one meeting. If that's at all possible to do more than one public meeting, I think that would be a good thing. I also appreciated David Eicher's comment that, through this, we just have to be cognizant that any changes that we make are going to try to push it. So just try to be as aware as possible. So maybe even though we're going for a November 2020 timeline, to kind of crunch it a little bit, just so that we have a little room in case we need it. I don't know that we will, but there you go. I think with development code, I've heard from planning staff and from our city manager that there are some kind of obvious errors or obvious spots to fix, and I have no problem with those going forward, and getting those done along the way as is possible and as is necessary. I think that's important. I think that's what we should be doing. What else we got? As far as sitting down with the Planning Commission, I love it. I think that would be fantastic to be able to do that. Looking forward to the CEQA study. I think that'll be really cool to learn more about that very important piece of legislation and how it affects everything. And yeah, anything else that you need from me? Cool.
And now, our esteemed colleague, Madeline Agrimonti, bringing it home.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to say thank you to Larry Barnett, because I just put arrows from general plan, development code, UGB. And I agree with the November date for the UGB. The other thing is, I'm kind of worried when people talk about underutilized parcels. And I'll tell you why, because I'm so afraid of people saying, we need that land, we need housing, let's do eminent domain. Those are things that scare me. I know their need is out there. So that's sort of a scary thing to me. I hope that's not on anyone's mind. So I believe the Planning Commission is such a wonderful resource, because they spend hours on things that I'm so happy they do, and they just bring the information to us. So I really am appreciative of the hard work that they do. I think that might be it. I really appreciated what our public has offered us, because I think that they make some good points, and it reminds us of what we do here and how important it is. I think these are huge. This is historic for us to have to be part of this. So I'm really excited, especially we have some new staff, which I was looking at the power team over there, including our chief, Chief Aker, but they look like a power team to me, so I'm pretty excited about this. And of course, Wayne Wyrick, who is, you can't ever leave because you have the history, sorry. But, so that's my advice, and I'm pleased to be doing this tonight.
Madeline, I'm sorry, Councilmember Agrimonti, one question. In terms of the vacant land inventory and housing action, is that something you're also ready to have us move
I'm
forward?
interested in, but
Great.
I want to ensure the fact that if people don't want to
Great, I
sell
just
their
wanted to
land,
clarify.
they don't
Okay,
have to.
I don't think we can afford eminent domain. It's very expensive here.
No, you're absolutely right about that.
On that note, I think we can conclude
Yes,
this
thank
item.
you very much for your feedback and for the community's participation.
Thanks. Now on to item 6.2, an update on the city's preparation efforts for potential extended power outages due to PG&E Public Safety Power Shutoff Program, and approval of resolution for funding of emergency preparation relating to PSPS event planning. City Manager and Chief Aker.
just got a whole new cabinet for all this crap. My paper.
Circular file.
You don't throw this in the...
No.
What? Throw it away?
I'm all about that tonight, sorry.
You keep these? Do you ever read them again?
I do. These are reference for me. I'm from old school.
Good evening, Mayor Harrington, council members of the community. So we are pleased to be here tonight to give an update about the efforts that your team and different partners have been working on for the last couple months to prepare for the PG&E Public Safety Power Shutoff. Tonight I have with me folks that will be helping with this, and Chief Steve Aker will do part of the presentation with myself. Wayne Wyrick, who's our development services director and chief building official, also has been a key part of our emergency management team. And if there's questions on kind of generators and some of those types of things, Wayne is a great resource on some of that. Then Dave Jeffries, I'll have Dave kind of raise his hand. Dave is a consultant who is working with us. He's also working with a number of Marin agencies to prepare and has had conversations with Sonoma County. So he's got some good breadth and can speak to kind of the journey that we all are on this project. So a few just opening remarks before I turn it to Chief Aker. The PG&E Public Safety Power Shutoff, frankly, is a whole new challenge for all of us and is creating a major level of uncertainty. It is unprecedented to potentially be thinking about electricity that could be off anywhere from 2 days to potentially 7 days. As a community and frankly as a Bay Area, that is not something we're used to. And so we are in a new world, and there's a lot of work that's being done, I think, and there's definitely going to, some of this is potentially going to take some time to put in place, some longer term investments. But meanwhile, we'll give you an update about a lot of work that has been done. Just a few other quick items. One, I do want you to know that the public agencies, ourselves, the fire district, Sonoma County Emergency Management, we've all been actively working on operation and communication plans. As always, our business leaders, nonprofits, there's been really good participation, and we'll give you some updates of how we're partnering with some of our great community members. It's going to be very important, and you'll hear more about this, for residents to create their own personal plan, and really to be ready. We all need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and that's what we have been working on. As you hear the presentation tonight, there's been a lot of work, and there is some money that I'm also requesting that the council authorize so that we can make some investments and also be ready if there is a extended power outage in our community. The reality is this has been a kind of a new thing that PG&E has put on our plate, and understand why they've done it, but it is a new set of an emergency that we'll have to deal with. And yet everything we're doing is frankly an investment that if we have an earthquake or if we have any other kind of emergency, it is all good for us to be doing. It's just a lot of kind of focus and attention and work now that came out of left field for us, but we are where we are, and it's all good investment. And I think the only other piece I'll mention is council, and you all know from the October 17 fires. As a community, whatever happens, I know this community will come together, and folks will volunteer, and people will make it work, and staff and council will work as a partner, and with our partners. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Chief Aker to begin the presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for having us and for allowing us to share with the council, staff, and the public more about this, as City Manager Capriola said, a brand new world for us in emergency management. So just as a little bit more background to set the stage here, as council's aware, staff has been working really since the the very end of the 2017 fires to improve our overall emergency management. And we had a very, very robust after-action plan, work plan that we've been making really good progress on. And I think that we're going to have a future update that goes into some more of those general emergency management initiatives that we've put forward and improvements. But what that work did was really set the stage for now that as a team, we were able to respond pretty quickly to the situation that we've been faced with PG&E, that many other cities and communities may not have been quite at the same point and able to respond. So what is the PG&E public safety power shutoff? Well, it's a precautionary measure following the devastating wildfire seasons of 2017 and 18. And quite honestly, PG&E being found at fault for the vast majority of those fires, they had a choice, and they are expanding and enhancing their community wildfire safety program. The big thing that they have done this year is they have expanded the public safety power shutoffs to include transmission lines. So those are the big lines that come over from like Lakeville on the big metal power poles and bring the high voltage into communities. We did, as a county, have a couple of public safety power shutoffs towards the tail end of 2018. They were isolated in the very north end of Sonoma County, and as an operational area, as a county, we were able to respond to that and react to that pretty well. They were fairly small incidents, maybe 400 or so customers, but fire emergency managers, Department of Health, we have the ability to have to call conference calls and coordinate all of our efforts, increase resources where they're needed, monitor the medically fragile. All of those systems are in place, and we learned that last year. What really changed for us, as I said, for this year is the transmission lines. We were prepared for neighborhoods to be turned off on the distribution lines. Say the Lovell Valley area or 7th Street East, Norbaum Road. We were prepared for that. What we weren't faced, or what we weren't quite ready to hear from PG&E was in the springtime, they decided that they would then shut off transmission lines. And that, as we tried to drill down with PG&E, and getting the information from PG&E was not easy. And they weren't really forthcoming initially. I said, oh, maybe they might affect this. And by the time they finally told us, late May, early June, that transmission lines were indeed in play, it became very apparent to us that we had to prepare for the whole community, the whole valley being without power. So, again, very new challenge, lots and lots of uncertainty with this and what it might mean for us. And as Kathy very, very eloquently said, we need to be prepared for the worst but hope for the best. Public safety power shutoffs, and this is directly from PG&E. Again, this is their program, but a lot of the response to this does fall on us in local government. So they're looking at multiple factors to declare a public safety power shutoff. They're looking at red flag warnings as declared by the National Weather Service, low humidity levels, forecasted sustained winds, generally above 25 miles an hour, condition of dry fuel, and on-the-ground real-time observations. So these are things that us in the fire community, we monitor on a weekly basis. We coordinate with the National Weather Service, and we have a pretty good idea when red flag conditions are kind of going to come up. So we have a little bit of a head start on this, but
yeah, and maybe just to add a little bit to that is Steve, I think it's helpful for the public, and council, I believe, is aware of this. There basically are, coming out of the fires, there's weekly calls with the County Office of Emergency Services, city managers, fire chiefs, police chiefs. It's a regular call once a week. Everyone pops on, and if there's nothing to report, there's nothing to report. if there is and the National Weather Service is on that call. So whether it's a rainstorm we're looking at, or whether it is a potential fire, and then if the National Weather Service is saying 10 days out, looks like, we see this happening, could be some red flag, then sometimes there's another call, and sometimes we've got calls 2 times a day. So and the National Weather Service, whether it's a storm condition or it's a red flag condition, they are on those calls providing that information. They are also providing the same information to PG&E, and sometimes PG&E is on those calls. So there is that level of kind of communication and coordination. So, we should have a little bit of a runway if and when these things are occurring.
Yeah, and thank you for that further explanation. And that was what happened towards the end of last year when we did have those isolated PSPS events in the North County. We were on daily conference calls, including PG&E, Department of Health Services, fire, emergency managers. Everybody coordinated, making sure that we had all the information and we were ready to respond. So public safety power shutoff event notifications. As we know, extreme weather threats can change quickly. PG&E's goal, dependent on the weather, is to provide customers with advance notice prior to turning off power. They will also provide updates until power is restored. So they have put out a timing of notifications, and of course it's when possible. Ideally, they will be able to notify us 48 hours before electricity is turned off, and then again 24 hours before electricity is turned off, and then just prior to electricity being turned off. They will continue to notify during the public safety outage and then once again after power has been restored. So members of the public should have all received a nice big trifold, thick, colorful PG&E notification to do you have a plan to stay safe during wildfire season? And this came out within the last couple of months. It does have some good details in here about what to expect and for what each member of the public should be doing to create a plan and ensure their own safety as best as possible.
And maybe just one other thing looking at this slide. I think one thing that, and we'll talk more about this, but I think one thing that's been tough about this issue is the public, I don't think, quite understands the amount of time that this could be off, because what this means is potentially once they turn it off, it's going to be off. If this is a 3-day red flag event, it's going to be off for those. They're going to shut it off a little bit before. It's going to be shut off for maybe a 1-day event, maybe a 3-day event. And then it could take them anywhere from 1 day to potentially 3, 4, or 5 days, depending on how big of the area that they're taking the grid down, to check every line to make sure it's safe to turn the electricity back on. So there's the before, there's the event, and then there's the after. And that's what makes this potentially maybe a 7-day event.
All right, so next question, what does this mean? Means that PG&E will be shutting off power to areas recognized by the CPUC as either Area 2 or 3 in terms of elevated or extreme areas of wildfire risk. This includes, as we talked about before, both transmission and distribution lines. And although a customer may not live in a high fire threat area, which most of the city limits itself is not within those elevated areas, they could definitely be affected because of the transmission lines passing through their communities. So City of Sonoma is not in either tier 2 or tier 3, but is close to both. Parts of the Sonoma Valley include both tier 2 and tier 3 areas. And as Kathy just said, power would be shut off during the event and potentially remain off for 2 to 3 days afterwards. So PG&E has done some work on that. We were part of a pilot training program in terms of them trying to be prepared to do the inspections and restore power to an area. And I believe in July they had helicopters flying some of the transmission and distribution lines just as a practice dry run of, doing the inspections. So they've kind of got a head start here in the valley anyway on knowing where our transmission lines are and having already done that exercise once. So here's the big map for the fire threat areas. Tier 2, which is elevated, is kind of in the yellowish, dark yellow. And Tier 3 or extreme areas are in red. So as we zoom into the potential impact to Sonoma, you can see Sonoma and El Verano are mostly not shaded, so they're not in Tier 2 or Tier 3 areas. But just north and then continuing up, and we see, not coincidentally, a lot of the areas that are in red here in Tier 3 were the most fire-affected areas in 2017. So PG&E has just recently released some new mapping tools. This is within about the last week to 10 days. So there's a website on the screen right now where PG&E is putting out a 7-day forecast for the potential of a public safety power shutoff. And then if they do implement a public safety power shutoff event, more information will be available at their website as well under updates. Okay, here's another planning map that PG&E just recently shared, and it has different outage areas. I don't know if you want to call them polygons or...
This is extremely confusing. Is each one of these like circle or outline areas like a potential area that they could just isolate and shut off? So it looks like there's like maybe, I don't know. It also just looks like a big scribble.
Yeah, we don't. I wish we had more clear definition on this.
Like
it
means?
would, but this has been our biggest challenge throughout trying to manage this potential, is trying to get the information that we really need from PG&E. And so this map of polygons or scribbles, the way I interpret that is each one of those are potential areas that they could shut off, but I don't know that they have the ability to just do one of those. Based on the weather conditions, they're probably not going to do just one of those. It's probably going to be a whole swath of them.
But like some of these are like complete outlines, and then other ones don't connect. Like it's just.
Yeah.
So this is, in order to plan for this, part of what we asked PG&E for months ago was, can you show us a map? Can you be clear to me if you need to take the electricity down up on Norbaum, what part of that affects the city? They will not give us that information. Maybe these are areas, but that clarity is not there. So, and there's definitely ways, if those were areas, you could take down some areas, protect the Tier 3, and maybe still leave part of the city going and operational. So this has been one of the frustrations that as, kind of managers, we've not been able to get the clarity in order to do more in-depth planning.
So
this is a public map they've put out, and so, but it's unclear.
So not only is PG&E not finding a way that they can provide as a business to their customers in our town, our citizens, power and things like that, they're also not providing the information that the city needs to adequately plan for this.
It has been a challenge, and we have asked specifically to see those maps, and they've not been provided.
So could I just make a quick comment? I think I told you a couple of months ago that PG&E, I'm not defending them, I'm just saying through a group that I belong to, the speaker said PG&E has been trying to get maps from the Department of Justice to be able to really tell us what these lines are and everything, but the DOJ does not want to do that. So that might explain why this is looking like this.
I will say that there's, one of the things that San Diego has done a lot of investment, San Diego Gas and Electric, and we've spent time as fire and police professionals and city managers looking at some of their models to learn from them as we came out of the October 17 fires. And one of the items that San Diego has gone through, and they've basically created, this is the wrong terminology, but they've created these little squares and microgrids. So they've put infrastructure in so they can take down much smaller areas of their grid and sequentially in a way that is really planned, and the emergency managers know and PG&E knows. That infrastructure has not been put in this grid. And so with things have to come down, bigger areas have to come down. And that's part of, so in the future, hopefully some of that investment can get made and we can make this tighter. But at this point, it is broader areas that are affected, even though you may not be impacted.
Okay.
So let's keep going here.
Yep.
Challenge.
So challenges. We just talked about the program itself and the decision that we don't have any local control over the situation, but the impacts will fall on us as public agencies and, of course, the community that we serve. We have limited knowledge on PG&E's infrastructure. We have limited advance notice and how PG&E's parameters will evolve in a given situation. We also have no direct funding for impacts at this time. We're being told that this will not be considered a FEMA disaster and that there will not be any Red Cross assistance. So again, we don't know how widespread shutoffs will be. If they are significant, then there will be competition for resources and broader impacts. I mean, we've seen localized red flag warnings that just affect maybe Sonoma and Lake County, but we've also seen red flag events that cover almost the whole North Bay, from the East Bay Hills all the way up through Sonoma into Mendocino County. So we just don't know, and that's a real challenge for us.
And I think the other piece that, is that if this power shutoff occurs and there would be a real fire, then, again, all of the pieces of not having an electricity in order to communication, et cetera, that we'll talk more about, are also disturbing. So some of the ways this practically impacts Sonoma or in any other community that this would occur with.
Yeah, so we expect to see some kind of really big, almost immediate impacts. One is we won't have traffic lights or street lights, so people will have to remember back to their driver's training and the vehicle code to treat each of them as a four-way stop. We recognize that that's a big change out of the ordinary for people. We also don't expect to have gas stations or ATM machines functioning unless they are able to get up on generator power. We will expect to increase our calls for service for both police and fire, and especially we're expecting to see that with medical emergencies the longer an event like this goes on. So, 1 day, maybe 2 days, maybe not a real significant impact to us, but the longer it goes on, the longer that people, because we have to remember that these events are going to happen when it's hot and dry as well. So we have vulnerable populations that are going to feel the effects of not having air conditioning and other impacts from this, not having power. We're going to see an increase in medical emergencies, and that's going to tap us as first responders. It's going to tap the hospital. So we expect to see some pretty big impacts that way. And then, as Kathy just mentioned, communication challenges. We know that most cell towers have some battery backup right now. We're told up to about 8 hours is the most to expect. So the cell towers could lose their power, and if the cell companies don't have the ability to get generator power to there, then we're going to be without cell service.
Now, the cell companies have been saying publicly that they will be bringing generators in and they will keep service. But again, kind of to be determined.
Okay, next. We talked a little bit about this with the example in North County last year, but an important population and consideration for us is our access and functional needs community. We often refer to this as the medical needs. PG&E, again, in their plan here, they have their outreach. If you've registered your contact information with them on their website, there is a spot there to self-identify if you have an assisted medical device and you're in need of power for that device.
Yeah, what my big question is, will PG&E share that with you guys?
In a limited fashion.
Because I know that in Lake County when it happened, they wouldn't give the information to the sheriff's department, and there was 32 at risk during that.
So what they've determined is they will not share that need with us right now. But as they call an event and it gets close to an event, like that 48-hour window, they're saying at that point in time, they will give us access to their system, their database of the medically fragile or medical needy that are within the area that they have determined they are going to shut power off to.
And is that because of a HIPAA law, or is that, I mean, is that a law that could be changed, like the city of Sonoma, we could, write a letter on behalf?
I don't believe at the local level we could. It's potentially something at the state level, but there's been a lot of efforts made by emergency managers, not just at the local level, but counties and further, to try to get that information from PG&E. So
it seems like a simple thing. I mean, I understand people want privacy of their medical information, but it seems like a simple opt-in program that PG&E could offer its customers. Do you want us to share that you're medically insecure? Because to withhold it but we're going to dump it on you 48 hours before the event starts, and you have no time. Again, it's just like, we're not going to give you a lot of help in the preparation for this.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of medically dangerous people, or people who are in medical needs, and we have a lot of seniors, and these are going to happen on extremely hot days. And I was going to mention in my comments, but I'll just say it now. Japan this year had a heat event that got to 105 degrees. 41 seniors died. And it scares me a lot for this community. So it's shameful that we don't have this information. And yeah.
I just want to, this is a huge amount of information to go through, but as much as we can get through the presentation so we can have questions and comments at the end, and public comment would be great. Good comments, but go ahead.
Certainly. So we did find with the public safety power shutoff events that happened in the North County last year, we were able to manage, we were able to get the information on who the medically fragile were and ensure their safety. But again, that was a small scope. So we're still very concerned about coordinating with the Department of Health Services and Department of Public Health to make sure that we are able to ensure the safety and well-being of all the medically fragile. So part of that is that PG&E they've taken on some responsibility here and will be communicating with customers in their medical baseline program. They've got a number of different ways to reach them. We also have to look at our health facilities and our long-term care facilities. They are required to have an emergency plan and protocols in place for the safety of residents. And we're trying to do some additional outreach through our annual inspection program when we go out and touch base with them to make sure that they are not only aware of the potential for public safety power shutoffs, but that they have incorporated that into their emergency plans. The County Department of Public Health is actively involved in planning and communicating with PG&E. And through our efforts here with the city emergency management, and Vintage House. We're preparing information packets for senior citizens and other access and functional needs communities.
So let me shift a little bit to kind of an update on how we've been preparing, what to expect, and what you can do. So in terms of how we are preparing, we have been working really closely with Sonoma County Emergency Management Department. So one of their staff members, Sam Wallace, participates in our staff meetings and is at the table. We've been developing operational plans and doing our own business continuity plans. So really looking at, so we're going to have step by step of what, if this happens, we do this, if this happens, we do this, and kind of really doing some pre-thinking so we're not trying to figure it out in the moment. There's also been, and I'll talk to you a little more about some of the continuity of work that we've been doing. There's been a lot of work on generators and capacity to make sure we maintain our water service. I'm going to go through some of these in more detail. Cooling and power resource centers. We've talked about the access and functional needs, public information education, and then really coordinating with business and nonprofit school community. So in terms of the continuity of services, the city really has made a lot of prior investments. So the police department and our EOC are on permanent generator, ready to respond. Fire department and all the fire stations are on permanent generator, ready to respond. Public Works Courtyard has a permanent generator ready to respond. And our city wells either have permanent generators or they have portable generators, and those are all ready. City Hall is not, there is not a permanent generator. We have the ability to put a portable in and maintain kind of basic phone service and a few computers. The reality is if we have a public safety power shutoff, we will be opening our EOC ahead of time. We'll be staffed, we'll be ready. So a chunk of the folks that would be at City Hall will be over here in our EOC, and then we'll keep kind of a skeleton crew to do kind of public information, provide information to folks walking in, and et cetera. The Carnegie Library, where we run finance, and the Visitors Bureau, we will be bringing in a portable generator to keep regular services there, especially with the tourists and the community. We think it's really important to make sure that we have that facility, and we've been working closely with Tim Zahner with the Visitors Bureau so that they can be putting their own kind of communication plans and be ready to help work with any visitors that we have in town if this should occur. One thing is our water service is gravity-based, and we have generators where they're needed. So the water, even if electricity goes off, water service will continue. We've done training for our employees and preparing them to serve as disaster service workers. We have purchased some new radios, again, so that those, if there is some communication outages as staff, we have the ability to communicate around town. And then the EOC, and then one of the financial areas we're looking at is for some satellite phones if we lose communication, cell phones, so that we at least have that emergency backup. It's kind of an insurance policy, a few satellite phones that we could reach the county EOC, et cetera. So that's some of the continuity of city services that we've been working on. In terms of cooling and power resource centers, and I know this has been a large concern of council, and this has been something that's kept me up at night as we've been trying to work this through. So PG&E is stated, and I've had a number of conversations with them, I know as Steve is as well, that they will, and I have a local commitment that they, if there is a shutoff, they will bring tents in with air conditioning, power, and computers. However, depending again on how widespread this is, I think we need to be able to kind of take care of ourselves as well. So we are working closely with the county. The city, as I understand it, and Wayne Wyrick can speak to this, but city, as I understand it, we helped put in a transfer switch at the Vets Memorial Center, not our building. Vets Memorial Center is owned by the county, but the city helped pay to put a switch so a generator could be brought in and you could run that building, and because it serves as our emergency shelter as it does for the county. The switch itself, though, was not sized to operate HVAC. So that is, it needs to be resized, and it actually needs to be repaired.
So, Madam Mayor, could I ask a question? We talked about this, about the transfer switch, and I learned about it, and we all have, if we want to get generators, if there isn't anything, a transfer switch is necessary. So are we paying for these transfer switches on these buildings right now, or we have them?
In terms of the facilities I talked about before, we have permanent generators, and so it's all built in. The Carnegie has a transfer switch, and so we can pull up a portable generator there and plug in. The Vets has one, but it needs to be upgraded. And so that's what is in the process of happening. The county has reserved a portable generator in the situation that we need to activate. As a backup plan, I've had staff investigate, and I want to thank Erica for her work on this, to okay, what would it cost to have a 100-person tent with air conditioning, with charging, if we need to do that? And so we have basically POs built, purchase orders, kind of invoices, those are all in process that we can pull the plug with a few days warning, and that's one of the cost issues we're asking you for. So if we need to put up a tent for 100 people, we would probably do that in Depot, is the site we think makes most sense. It needs to be on asphalt, so it's accessible for ADA. We also wanted a place that would that there was easy parking and that there could be some shade and people could walk out, and so Depot seemed like a good location. Another piece we're asking for some funding in this year is, as we've really thought about the situation, because if we're in the situation this year, we're going to be in the situation for a few years. So even if it doesn't impact us as a community, we need to be thinking proactively for next year. And so I want to thank the team. We've done some brainstorming. As council knows, we own the land where Vintage House is. And Vintage House built the building, but they've been a really good partner, and we're looking at what would it take to add permanent generator or portable generator capacity for Vintage House in the future. The library, we own the library. It is our building and our land. So that is another perfect place for a cooling center in the future that, again, we could work. And I know the county emergency management is looking at the libraries across the county could be a perfect place for cooling centers in the future. So those are places that I want to thank Wayne for the work he's done. We have a consultant ready to go in, analyze what it would take to put in that infrastructure, and then come back with further costs. We've also done some outreach in partnership with Sonoma County Emergency Services to some other key partners to see if we needed something bigger or more. And clearly, as council knows, Sonoma Raceway was a great partner during the October fires. And Hannah Boys Center in their new auditorium, they have a generator. So we have spoken to them, and they are both willing to open facilities in an emergency and willing to work with us. So I think we've got a lot of good pieces in place here to make sure that we can keep our community cool if and when this occurs. Steve?
Yeah, I'd like to add that the focus of the cooling and power resource centers are simply to provide people during the heat of the day a place to cool down, recharge their electronic devices, maybe get some water, and just get out of the heat. These are not full-blown shelters like we did when an area was evacuated in the fires like in 17. So these are cooling and resource centers. They'd likely be open during the daylight hours, and then people would be encouraged to go back to their homes or wherever they are choosing to stay during these events.
Would it make sense to do a dry run of them, and then for the people who would be targets for going to them, have them come see where they are? Or is it too hard because we don't know who those people are?
I think it's a little hard because we don't know where they are. I think as these things get settled a little more, I think what we see is having a page. We'll talk about this. We have a page built that when there is an emergency, it is one page where all of our public information will go and be linked off of, and there could be a map, there could be descriptions. But depending on, again, maybe it's not the entire valley or the city, maybe it's a neighborhood, and so maybe we can do something smaller or one, or maybe it's something we need to do all of them. So I think part of it is making sure that we've got, again, things teed up so when we have to do it, we can do it and not be trying to figure out addresses at that point and those types of things.
I'm sorry, have we talked about high school?
We've talked about the high school, and the high school at this point does not have there's no generator capacity. They are interested in looking at how they can get some battery backup for their solar. They are exploring generators. At this point, the school district does not have any generators in place. I don't think any of the schools do. And so, that is but again, as we think through the future, having the high school and maybe Adele Harrison set up to serve as emergency shelters and having some of that. Again, the other thing we found from the October 17 fires is when we had those two schools as shelters, because electricity was down at the school administration, that's where their computer hub is. So those schools didn't have email and some of the tools that would have been really helpful. So that's the other piece I know the school district's looking at, is how do they put some generators in their admin building that then could help, support the satellite schools. So just like all of us, they're doing their own business continuity review and trying to figure these new challenges out. So if and when, again, I think we need to be clear again, it is an if. But if it does happen, again, we will be meeting weekly and we'll be working with PG&E. We would have warnings about red flag events. There would be early notice as much as we could give to the public and key partners. We'd be ordering the generators. We'd be preparing these cooling centers. We'd open our EOC. Again, we would definitely open it for sure if there's something affecting the city, and we may need to open it if we're providing mutual aid to the county. Again, we have this new page, and this is the website address. It's our main city address, /emergency-updates. And then when we have an emergency alert banner goes across the top of our website. So that's all the capability that Sarah Tracy's been building. I want to also just go back a little bit as we talk about public information, which is where the next few slides are. We began community outreach in June. I want to thank Mark Bodenham with the chamber. I reached out to Mark. As council knows, this is when we were focused on budget, and I asked Mark to help out work with PG&E and bring in some community meetings. So he and his team organized a meeting on June 1st with a business outreach meeting at the lodge, and they hosted, and we're appreciative of that. And then June 25th, and we had two different sessions, both focused for residents and seniors at Vintage House, and thank their support. And then the county had a general public meeting. We put in information in our About Town July newsletter, and been doing general e-news updates as well, and we're about ready to ramp it up even more. So there is in terms of the PSPS public information, there is another page on our site with the /extended-power outages, and that's where all kinds of general public information is. We have been and will continue to do some social media, and Sarah Tracy, our public information, is connected with county and Bay Area PIOs. As council knows, one of the things the fire chiefs have done is there is an actual red flag that we will be flagging, we will be hanging on red flag days, and this is something that's happening at all the fire houses throughout the county, and we'll be doing that at police and city hall as well, so that'll be a visual element. One of the items we've been also talking with KSVY. If there's not cell phone communication, the FM radio is a great way to get the word out. And so we'll talk a little more about that, but basically we are looking at how do we make sure they're resilient and how do they be our backup communication, and I believe it's worth some city investment to help make sure that they can do that for us. One of the things that we've found as we look at trying to get this information out, and Mark Bodenhammer will talk a little more about this with the businesses. There has been a lot of information going out, but if you don't really understand the issue, you don't understand the magnitude, and you don't understand how important it is. So it really almost takes one-on-one conversations, and then people go, oh. And so we're going to be trying, a variety of ways, creative social media, one-on-one, old school, packets, hand delivering, a variety of things that we can try to be getting the word out. And one way is to have Vintage House, based on relationships they have. They are going to be taking some packets we've put together of resident packets with some attachments and background, because some of the older population may not be comfortable with the world of social media and the website. So something they can post on their bulletin board, they can make copies, they can distribute to their communities. And so really appreciate Vintage House being willing. Those will be going out in the next few days and doing some of that outreach. I've had meetings with the Chamber and the Visitors Bureau and Vintners and Growers talking about kind of how we can communicate with tourist community and what business needs are and how they can collaborate. And those 3 executive directors are all lined up. There is a lot of information on generators, and if people have questions, Wayne can answer some of that. There's definitely some places that folks need to be careful about generators and do it right and do it safe. And some people think, well, I have solar, so I don't need a generator. Well, unless you have a battery, once the grid goes off, your solar won't work. So again, before the event, you need to make sure PG&E's got your cell phone. You need to register for all the emergency alerts, and you can subscribe to all those up on our website. And then during, folks need to keep those devices charged, have battery backups, use text instead of phone calls. And again, we've got a variety of information on this website about how to communicate. KSVY has a nice phone app too. If folks don't know, it's a good one to download. And again, we want people to be able to get information. This is just some information about where to sign up on emergency alerts. And again, this is a link to that page, and we'll have this available for the public. So one of the, some of the information that we've just put out late yesterday is there is a page now on our website called For Residents and Are You Ready? And it has all kinds of information. Folks can download plans, information, and that's part of the same information that's in this kind of packet. So where we can go kind of old school or electronic school. And again, folks really need to be planning, and you also need to be planning of not only your own business, your own family, but if schools are unable to operate, what are you going to do with your child as well? So there is a whole resident page. And then we have a business page as well that's built, and I'd like to ask Mark Bodenhammer to come up. One of the things that, as council knows, come on up, Mark. As council knows, we have a contract with the Chamber of Commerce, and so Mark really works as our kind of economic development, business development outreach. So if I had this person sitting inside city staff, I would have asked the person to do this, and so I asked Mark to kind of do some to do those outreach meetings in June, but also to do some outreach to really go do meetings with businesses to see what people knew. And so let me turn it to him and have him give you an update.
Thanks, Kathy, and good evening, Mayor, members of the council, and staff. I want to, first of all, thank the city for your partnership. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have the tall guy problem. I'm too far away from the
Welcome. We're
microphone.
happy to have you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. So first of all, I do want to thank the Sonoma Valley Vintners and Growers and the Sonoma Valley Visitors Bureau and Vintage House, who were key partners in all of the things that we talked about tonight. We really couldn't have done it without their partnership, so it was great working with them. I thought quickly touch on the outreach workshops. They were successful. I wish that there were more people, obviously, but it's always hard to get people attending. A good opportunity to bring people together and get some new ideas. I think that some of the questions that were brought up raised new concerns that PG&E hadn't thought of, that our staff hadn't thought of, that public safety people hadn't thought of. So it's great getting that group of people together to talk through how these complications are going to come together. I also want to point out that after those meetings, PG&E specifically said we were the only community that had brought together fire, the city, the business community, the residents, and some senior advocate groups to do these. So they were taking our flyers and sending them out to other communities to say, this is a good thing that you guys should be doing. So I think it's worth noting that we were out front and taking a leadership role in that. So that was pretty cool to hear. With regard to the business community outreach, it was kind of a dual purpose process. One was education, telling the people out in the community one-on-one about what this is going to look like and the seriousness of it. I think everybody, myself included, we envision a power outage as being sort of a 2 or 3 hour thing that's an inconvenience, and then we all laugh about it tomorrow morning at the office. But people really don't understand what happens and how much more serious with every hour or 5 hours or day that this continues going. So that was a good part of the process. And then also gathering information. As noted on here, we were trying to do an inventory of which businesses had backup generation. But in addition, we were also trying to get just basic information about their hours and their website and contact information for right now. Also, their ability to provide services without power. Some businesses don't have backup power, but they have a plan in place where they're just going to open the doors for as long as it's light and continue doing transactions with cash or with an old school credit card swiper machine. And then lastly, collecting information about backup businesses. So if you bank with Wells Fargo and you show up here and Wells Fargo is closed and the internet's down because your computer won't work, you need to know where the next Wells Fargo is. So we're collecting that information too, so we can help inform people about where to go and what to do. And some of these things came up on the fly. We hadn't really thought about that need until we got out there and realized, wow, this is how this is all going to play out if there's a major outage here. Some of the things we learned, there's a lot of misinformation and misconceptions out there, and it's I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I think it's just a new thing that we're all learning about. Many of the people we spoke with didn't know at all about what a public safety power shutdown was. They didn't. They thought that they were on a hospital grid, which then prevented them from being shut off. Number one, the hospital is just as likely to be shut off as anybody else. And number two, as we saw with that beautiful map, nobody really knows where those grid lines really are. So people are kind of guessing. Also,
But the hospital has generators.
The hospital
So
certainly
we'll
has
have a
generators.
hospital.
Yes, I don't want to create a big stir, but the hospital is not exempt from having their power shut off by PG&E. They just have laws in place that force them to have backup generation. Also, a lot of uncertainty about what a generator might do. So certain businesses have generators. But as we learned, I met with one representative from a business who thought that they had a generator that was going to power their entire operation. In looking back through some of the paperwork when they filed for getting that approved with the city, it may not do that. So we're still in the process of doing our due diligence to make sure that even the people who are there know what their backup generation is going to do. Again, we all have these systems in place, and they're kind of an emergency service thing, but everybody's learning new ways of using them and thinking through the timing of it. Other takeaways that make it a little bit difficult for us to gather the information. Most of the businesses that you see up here, the banks, the gas stations, groceries, pharmacies, they're all corporate-owned businesses. They're not really the local-owned businesses that we have here. So there's additional complications with gathering information, and the people on the ground aren't necessarily the decision makers or the ones who would have installed it if there is a backup generation system. So a little complicated there. Banking and gas are definitely going to be two problems. If there's no power, gas pumps don't work, and if there's no security cameras, banks lock their doors. So those are two things that we notice are going to be kind of an issue. Lastly, we were gathering an emergency contact list. So obviously we have our phone number that we have in our chamber directory, but that's not the number that we want to call if and when PG&E calls the city and says they're going to shut off the power. So we're putting together a good emergency contact list so that when we do get that call, we can call a live human's cell phone at each of the banks and the gas stations and the grocery stores and give them as much forewarning as possible that this is going to happen. And again, this is something where we've got the support of the Vintners and Growers and the Visitors Bureau who are giving us their, internal proprietary lists that we normally wouldn't share with each other, but we're all kind of rallying together to make this work. So moving forward, we're happy to continue doing these things. It's a really important part of our role here in the community, and also welcome any feedback. One of the things that I noticed when we were out there as I was driving to a grocery store, I saw a locksmith, and I thought, you know what? That's probably a business we might need to know about. A lot of people now have, the fancy locks that are electrical. So if you think of other businesses that you would like added to these inventories, please let us know. We're happy to keep doing this work and here to answer any questions if any pop up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just a few more brief slides, and I want to thank Mark for he and his team. It was a very hot Friday. They went out and spent the entire day talking with businesses. So again, one of our partners, Sonoma County, off the Department of Management, Emergency Management, they have a big emergency preparedness fair, September 8th from 10 to 3 at the fairgrounds. I think they're giving away thousands of emergency kits. So really would encourage folks to go. I'm sure there'll be a lot of great information. And then also Sonoma County on September 5th is going to be testing their emergency alert system, and we'll put more information out on this. So 10 o'clock in the morning for about an hour, they're going to be testing the wireless emergency alert, the SOCO alert, and a new tool, the National Weather Service NOAA weather radio. And if I can have Erica, so the new NOAA radios, and maybe the chief can speak to a little bit about these. Come on up. So we have purchased one of these for each council member, so that and they have batteries in them. You will want to plug them in, but take them home tonight, plug them in, and you can hear them go off. Yeah. Hopefully sometime tomorrow, 10 o'clock, and be part of that test. And Chief, do you want to talk about how they're going to be used?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is one of the big improvements that as a county, in terms of emergency preparedness, that we've been able to make since 2017. So I know Councilmember Hundley is very familiar with these, growing up in tornado area. But this is something new for us on the West Coast. But the NOAA radio system, our county is the first one to have signed an MOU with the National Weather Service to be able to provide emergency alerts based on fires and weather events and disasters to Sonoma County. We're very fortunate that we have a NOAA site on Sonoma Mountain, and so our coverage with the NOAA radios is very, very good. Better in many areas even than cell service. So in some of the canyons and hill areas where we don't see good cell service, we have really good NOAA radio service. So the neat thing about these, as the city manager mentioned, was these, as long as they have power to them, they don't have to be turned on, but as long as they have power to them, either plugged in or battery power, when the National Weather Service from Monterey sends that tone through here, they will activate. It's like our old pager systems. And so it will wake you up at night. The other neat thing is, we talked about our vulnerable populations, and these radios have the ability to have accessories hooked up to them, either strobe lights or bed shakers. So for people that are either hard of hearing or deaf, can have alternative means connected to these that will wake them up. So really important initiative that County Emergency Management has put together.
So again, if you're sitting at home and watching this, or, what can I do? So you need to have a personal plan and do it now. Don't put it on I'll take care of that this weekend. There's a lot of information on the city's website. And the one thing I will say is there's almost, as staff, it's almost been so much information, it gets overwhelming in terms of what to put out. So we're going to try to do some chunking it of little bites and some things you all can help push in social media. But there is a lot of information. So the other thing is, if there's an extended outage, call a friend, figure out a place, your relative, where can you go stay, make a mini vacation of it, but have a place you can go. I'm stealing this from Dave Jeffries, our consultant. This is his language. I like this cash up, gas up, charge up, and stock up. So when you get that notice, or when it looks like we're going to have a red flag, get some cash, hide it in your house, gas your car, charge up all your necessary electronic equipment and battery backups, and then stock up on water and non-perishable food and medicine for 7 days. And contact your neighbors and build a support network to help each other. So the other item on this agenda item, in addition to providing kind of an update and this information, is a request for funding. So as we look at the cooling and power resource centers, whatever site we're using, we're going to need power cords, power strips, and some things, and we want to purchase some of those and just have them in boxes and ready to go. We also, as I mentioned, we're doing this facility assessment to look at what we can do for City Hall, Vintage House, and Library for next year. And so that assessment is about $16,000 and will give us a better sense, and we'll come back. I want to thank Wayne for his work on that. We've also been reaching out with Bob Taylor with KSVY to look at a one-time financial contribution to help them with generator infrastructure for both their radio and tower locations. We've also, Erica's been working with Bob Taylor they've also applied for a grant with Rebuild North Bay. But it's about $15,000 to help them get those generators and do what they need to do. And again, as we think about our emergency communication, having that as kind of a communication of, in some ways, the last resort that if everything else fails, it would be a really important one to have. And we appreciate the partnership with Sonoma Valley Community Communications. We're looking at buying a few satellite phones and doing some other maybe telecommunications so that, again, we can do some communicating. And then there's some contingency funding here where the generator rentals for Carnegie and City Hall are about $10,000 to $15,000 potentially per time. We're still finalizing some of this, but temporary tents for the cooling center could be $10,000 to $15,000 per time. And there's other items that may come up. So, kind of a bare minimum of a request is looking at something at about $81,000. If there actually is an emergency and we open the EOC and we declare emergency, then, again, I have the ability as the EOC director to procure some additional things that we need to be able to respond. But these are some things that we knew ahead of time and it felt appropriate to bring them to you for your review. So basically we need to be ready, and as a community I have no doubt we'll work this through, and we're happy to answer any questions. I do want to thank the group that's been working on this, myself, Steve Aker, Jim Kaminsky is battalion chief, our police chief Orlando, Wayne Ryrick with Development Services, Lori Decker and Sarah Tracy have been working on all the public information, Dave Jeffries our consultant, and then Sam Wallace, our son, who's with the county emergency management, and then all kinds of partners, but in particular, Mark Bodenhammer and the chamber have really stepped up big time and appreciate that. So with that, happy to answer any questions and hear any feedback.
Councilmember Hundley.
So you mentioned a declaration of emergency, and we know that it's not. We've said that FEMA's not going to recognize it, won't have the Red Cross, but is that what the plan is? Is that the city, if we know this was coming, does it depend? Like, how does that going to work? And what's the benefit of doing that?
Yeah. So so first we would open the EOC ahead of time, so we'd be ready to respond, and then when the electricity went off, we would be positioned to kind of take calls, triage, support police and fire in the field, look to see what we need. The actual declaration of the emergency gives some additional procurement abilities. It also, though, lets us do a curfew. It allows, there's some other things that occur that in an emergency. Now, I'm not sure we would immediately declare an emergency. We can open our EOC and use that as a functioning coordinating body without declaring an emergency. So, I think that we would wait and see how things are looking. It also depends what the scope and how big and what the impacts are. So I think that's to be determined.
I was wondering about, maybe Mark knows or can find out, was just related to business insurance and that sort of thing, that perhaps it could be something that would be sort of helpful in different ways. And my other question is, what's the deal with landlines? So I heard at first that if you had a plug-in phone that didn't need an external power source, then it would work. But then I heard if it was Comcast, it wouldn't, but it was old AT&T that it would. Does anybody know?
Yeah, so we can have Dave Jeffries, maybe, let me give Dave a chance to introduce himself to all of you, and I know he's had this question in a lot of places.
Hi, thank you for having me here tonight. Again, Dave Jeffries, been working with your team. So I would look at this as three questions. There's the landline phones from AT&T, and if you have an older phone that doesn't require you plug anything in, you're probably okay. Now, if your phone system at home requires a base and wireless handsets, you're probably okay as long as you have that plugged into a battery unit of some kind and your phone stay charged. But when you lose the electrical part of those wireless phones, the problem is with your connection, not AT&T. Comcast is voice over IP, and so it really isn't a landline phone in the traditional sense. So the issue there is your Comcast signal. And so as when we talk to businesses, the same thing is what does your VoIP system need? Well, it needs that modem. Well, if you don't have any electricity going to the modem, basically, if you don't have internet, then your voice over IP phone is going down too. But if you're able to keep that up, then there's no particular reason you should lose the Comcast. But like I said, if you can't support the equipment that makes that work, that's really the challenge for that.
And have you dealt with situations that have lost cell service? And what are people supposed to do if there's an emergency?
The discussions we've had with the cell service and with some other agencies I'm working with as well, that's a huge concern for us because it's not only voice, but more and more it's data. And for public safety agencies, relying more and more on cellular data for their dispatch systems, for their report writing systems. So I was encouraged when the articles came out recently from the cell company saying, we're there. I always take that with a little trepidation until we see it the first time. So there is some hope there, but without that, we're expecting, 3-4 hours in, we may start losing that. And so part of the planning process is, again, what do you do? Do we man police and fire stations around the clock so people have a place to go to report things? Do we become more visible on the street with public works, police, and fire vehicles to maintain a presence out there? We're going to have to look for those sorts of things because we're being handed a problem to address as best we can.
Councilmember Cook.
I've been to a couple of these meetings, and thank you, Steve, for all your hard work on this. I guess my biggest question is the city of Sonoma. I know that the county has been talking about neighborhood groups, getting organized, get to know your neighbor, block parties. There's been talk about possibly even some funding to go to have barbecues to try to get people to know. Right now, does the city of Sonoma, are we going to have something in place, or where would they go to get that information?
So we haven't had the ability to get into the block party type of events yet. And some of the feedback we've heard from other partner agencies that have done them is kind of mixed reviews. But what we do have in place and has been kind of the hallmark of our program for a lot of years is our SCOPE program. And that's Sonoma citizens organized and prepared for emergencies. And that's something that our firefighters have taught in the community for more than 10 years. And part of that program is to get to know your neighbors and get a connection, get those phone trees, get to know your neighbors, at least know who they are, and make sure that you as a neighborhood are looking out for each other. And I think we saw some of that, really demonstrated in 2017 with the fires because, it happened so fast and happened at night that, really neighbors relied on each other to help, alert and get everybody out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What do you, I guess, in terms of the emergencies, so for volunteers, will that be at the community center again?
Yeah, so another great partner has been the Sonoma Community Center, that they are a volunteer manager. So, and they have been doing work not related to PSPS. They've been doing work, part of our work plan to make sure they're ready for the next whatever emergency it was. So one, they've done training with their volunteers. They've did more thorough vetting and clarification of duties, etc. So yes, if in a situation we need, and that's part of the planning, I think, as we're putting this together, for example, we're now at a point of like, okay, now that we're clear on some of the facilities, et cetera, like, all right, what are we going to need to staff a cooling center? And so let's say we're gonna want people to do A, B, and C, and we're gonna want maybe we want some help setting up, maybe we want folks help staffing. So that's gonna be part of a next outreach to John Gurney at the community center, saying, okay, this is a quadri. This is so that again, if and when this happens, we're not saying, how many volunteers do we need? Right. We're going to have that figured out ahead of time. He's going to have kind of a scope and a list, and then we're calling him saying, 2 days from now, looks like we need you to pull this and start that process. So yes, they are going to continue, have been, and will be doing that for us.
Great. And then my second question is, what do you imagine the role of the city council being during extended loss of power?
So I think there's always a role for the mayor to assist with any kind of key community communication as that kind of head of the organization. I know Rachel did some of that during the fire, so I think there is a role for the mayor. And I think the other piece is for the council to be out, being visible, communicating with the public. If there's issues that are coming up that we need to know, letting us know that as staff. And if we do open those centers, I think part of council can be really helpful to hopefully help people feel calm. And then if there could be things that come up that we like, we could really use this. So maybe 2 council members, could you go help with this? So I think as we start to work some of that out, there could be places where council with your expertise could be plugged in.
And then if we needed to have a city council meeting about some emergency matter, would we have the ability to give the notice, and would we have electricity, or would we have whatever would be required to actually hold a meeting?
Yeah, so one, because our computer hub is in the police station, and this is all on generator. And there are, as our city clerk was just mentioning, there are things within the government code that if you don't have electricity, how you can still hold a meeting. So there are kind of backup ways to do that. One of the things we are going to test, and I meant to mention this, in this building, we actually are going to do a refined, the generator's tested every 30 days, but one of the questions is, was it scoped to run this part of the building? Definitely runs the police station, runs the EOC. We're not sure that the council chambers and the lobby and the conference room, that it was scoped to run this. And maybe it runs the lights, but not the HVAC, or maybe it runs it all. Right. That is kind of a clarification question that I know Wayne and Trent have been looking at. But again, you can hold a public meeting, anywhere in town, and we would figure out a way to make that happen.
Great. Are there other questions? Vice Mayor Harvey?
So just a couple things. One of the points that Mark brought up was businesses applying for permits and things like that to get generators attached to their business. Do we have any idea what the kind of turnaround time is for businesses to do that? Is it kind of completely business dependent?
Let me have Wayne Wyrick come up and talk to you a little bit about that.
Yes, so the installation of a transfer switch and a portable generator or a permanent generator is not a big deal from a permitting standpoint. It does require the services of an electrical engineer or an electrical contractor that can put that documentation together, but it's fairly straightforward.
And then, kind of going forward long term, has there been any study at all on the possibility of getting more, crucial elements in Sonoma on solar with backup power or backup batteries? Is that just way out of scope price-wise? Is that something that we could consider long term?
So we've had conversations with the Chamber, Vintners and Growers and Visitors Bureau. We had a conversation about maybe we get through this season, and sometime maybe November or January, we reach out and we have Sonoma Clean Power come in and maybe be part of a public education workshop and talk about, and maybe more broadly, about what communities can do. And I know Mayor Harrington is on their board. So one, that could be something that it could be a more broader piece. It could be just kind of a business piece. There's also, if you recall, I'm not going to have this terminology right, I apologize, but there are these programs where you can, businesses and or residents, if you want to put solar in or you want to do some of these things, you can put them on your property tax and pay them over time. I'm forgetting the name of these programs, like a PACE program, excuse me. So they also have similar programs for energy resiliency. And there are county programs already in place for that. So there may be some ways to, one, educate what it could look like, and two, educate folks on here's economic opportunities to help you figure out how to fund it.
And that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that there's some things going on with that. Just, I'd heard from somebody that at UC Davis they have in their wine area they have solar panels, and then they got Leaf batteries, like old batteries from the Leaf cars that couldn't power the cars anymore. They were able to get those for free, and then they're able to power that situation there, which is kind of interesting. As far as our emergency preparedness, I think that's great to try to get some supplies and stuff. What? I'm gonna ask a question.
I just want to say I have a little personal emergency. My daughter's at home throwing up, and I'm going to have to go pretty soon. So I've been trying to decide whether I should stay or go. So I don't know the answer to that. But anyway, maybe after this item, I will turn the meeting over to you.
Okay. So that's awesome. Is it possible for us to also get the masks that you need, the appropriate masks during fires? I think that was a major shortage that we had during our fire. So if we had some of those things already on deck and ready to go, they're going to sell it at Friedman's. If we had some to give away, I think that would be really appropriate to include in that situation there. And the last thing, it sounds like maybe there's an opportunity and maybe there's a possibility while we're doing outreach to also try to gather some of that information about medically sensitive people. So as we're doing outreach through the chamber or through other kind of things, that we can do some kind of like, oh, hey, we're trying to build a list. Write your name down. We can have you there. We'll know to contact you.
So there's multiple databases for the medically dependent or medically fragile. PG&E has one. The Department of Health Services has one as well. So it's important that people register through those means. It would be really difficult for us to try to start a whole separate database. So we encourage people that are in that situation of having some medical needs or some fragility to really work with their doctors ahead of time, make sure they're signed up on PG&E's website, because once the event happens or is about to happen, we do get that information from them. We just wish we'd had it ahead of time.
Are there other questions?
I just have a quick comment. Two things, the transfer switch for residents. People, well, not tons of people, there have been friends in my neighborhood asking about, okay, should we get a generator? I don't really have that answer, but I know there's a cost, obviously, to the generator. There's a cost to having the transfer switch installed by an electrician, and there's also a permit. Is that correct? So those are the three things that people need to know. And then the other issue were the garage doors, automatic garage doors.
Yeah.
They're, an issue.
Yeah.
Battery backup, not battery backup. I just think it's still, it's like below the radar information, but people talk about that a lot.
Yeah, and this is something like if you're planning and like your own family continuity planning, where do you turn off the gas? Do you have the wrench? How do you open your garage? And we've looked for videos or ways to cut, but they're all these different styles, and so there's not like one, but most folks you can go and Google the type of garage door and look, and so we couldn't find one kind of good place to do some of that, but folks should practice it. Figure out how you're going to do it.
Right, and I know that the video I saw, I've actually put it out on Facebook with the generator, and it's a Honda one. I'm not working for them, but they really explained about generators and how they hook up to individual appliances or the house. So that was really interesting, and it's very simple. No, it's not simple, but I mean it's simple to watch.
Doable. Oh. Any other questions, Councilmember Hundley?
Just a related question, maybe for our expert on the subject, but what's the fuel situation expectations? Like, I'm not even sure that we have gas stations that are going to have power, but there's a lot of talk about all of these generators, which are all going to also want the same kind of fuel, which is the same kind of fuel that I imagine that we're going to want, so
far in the two communities I've mostly been working with, I'm not aware of a single gas station that's ready to go more than 3 or 4 hours. So that's part of why the recommendation was gas up before this ever starts. And that's a freebie because eventually you're going to use that gas anyway, so it's not costing you any more. For the generators and all that, there are some serious concerns. Some generators are dual fuel, they'll run on propane, so if you have natural gas lines, then you don't have the refueling problem. But if you are gonna use gasoline, one of the concerns I've heard come from the fire service as well is, you've been running this thing for hours, it's hot as it could be because it's been running, and now you're gonna pour gas into it. That presents a fire risk, and some of the recommendations are to stop and let it cool off before you try to refuel it. The idea of somebody having can after can after can of gas in their backyard is a little frightening for some places. So as this comes out, it may be knowing where those places are that aren't being affected by that particular shutoff, where you could go get fuel. You can imagine it might be a little busy that day, but those are the risks with that. So like I said, with natural gas, you're probably okay, but with gasoline, you probably want to have some supply, but not recommending a big stockpile of gas in everybody's yards.
Okay. Go ahead, Mark.
And just one quick item from our inventory, there were 0 gas stations in all of Sonoma Valley that had backup generators that the person who we dealt with was aware of. It's possible that some stations have a backup plan. But do keep in mind, one thing that I did forget to mention, equally important as the time period when the power is off, maybe even more so important, is the 48-hour window that we're going to have when we get the notice. It may not be a full 48 hours, but let's hope we have 24 hours or more. That's going to be a really key time, and we need to put equal emphasis on putting a good plan together for making sure everybody knows all of those things. Go to the gas station now, because once it's shut off, things are going to be different. But great point, Councilwoman Hundley. Generators are super awesome until you run out of gas, and then it's a very expensive yard decoration.
Yeah, and for the city and fire district, that we have preferred vendors that have a commitment to keep us fueled.
Thank you for all that great work. I am going to go take care of my daughter, and I will open public comment, and Vice Mayor Harvey will take over the meeting. I want to talk about the audit, but let's take a. Can you mind if we take a 3-minute break to figure this out? This part.
Well, we can't figure it out together.
Oh. I mean, I guess I could stay. Fuck it. I mean, okay. I mean, I have my kid at home sick alone. She's 12 years old, and I'm here doing this, and I really don't want. I want to participate in the audience, which I read the whole thing. Fine, go ahead.
I'll try to be quick. This is a really frightening prospect for me, and I don't think the public really understands or knows what it can expect. One idea that occurred to me as you were talking was that I think you ought to approach the Index Tribune about a insert that could be printed by them that the city could put together, and it's easy to print up more than enough copies for every household in Sonoma, to enlist a volunteer corps in the neighborhoods, perhaps through the community center, to distribute these inserts throughout the neighborhoods. I think basically this is an all hands on deck situation. We could have one of these red flag warnings in 2 weeks. And we're not ready, despite all the great efforts that have been made. And they are remarkable efforts. The fact of the matter is, when I sat down and just started thinking about the issues that are going to come up for the ordinary citizens, as Ms. Agrimonti noted, what about people who have prescriptions, life-saving prescriptions, that they can't get filled at a pharmacy because the pharmacy's closed because they have no electricity, and they can't get the prescription transferred to another pharmacy because all that's done electronically? These are people who are using insulin or other kinds of drugs that need to be refrigerated. The whole issue of refrigeration. I think one of the things you ought to have in your cooling centers available, if you put them together, is an ice machine. And you ought to be able to make sure that people have ice available to put in ice chests so that they can keep the things they have to keep cold at home cool. I'm not really sure what the hospital's role in all of this is going to be. That is to say, what are the services the hospital's going to offer this community if there is an electricity shutdown? I think that needs to be part of the information packet that goes out to the community. The same goes for food. I think telling people you need to have enough food in your home for 7 days isn't going to work. The fact is, if you've walked this town, as I know all of you have, and you've gone house to house, not every household in this city is filled with sophisticated, intelligent, well-prepared, and well-off people. There are a lot of people in this town who live a pretty marginal life. They don't have the money to go out buy 7 days worth of food in advance. They don't have $200 in an emergency. And this is a simple reality of the town, and I think we're going to have to be prepared to provide food and other sustenance to the vulnerable people. This is just the facts of what we are as a community. I am really not clear about how I'm going to call 911. I actually do have a landline, so if the landlines are working, I can use 911. But I think,
Mr. Barnett?
yes, give me just 1 minute longer. You guys, this meeting's gone on just a long time. Just 1 minute longer. I just have a short list.
You got 30 seconds.
That's fine. I don't know how I'm going to get in touch with 911. And I think other people are going to want to know. I think there has to be a coordinated plan as to where the assembly points and contacts people will be, and I thought Kathy's idea of having the map available will be essential. And I'm thinking about traffic control and accidents. I don't know if the CHP has been part of this whole planning process as well, but it seems to me that they're an essential part. And I think that if I were you folks, I would spare nothing. I would cancel every other project the city's doing right now and put every available body on responding to the potential of this emergency. I can't think of anything we can hit that is more important than that right now. Thanks for letting me go.
Hello, Acting Mayor Harvey and City Council and staff. I remember when I was at Lawson's Landing on the fire evacuation, and we were watching this giant plume of smoke come over the hill there from Lawson's Landing. The firemen were just great over there. They were really reassuring. So I'm confident in our public service officials that they're really going to step up. And so they really made us feel better. And these guys are used to dealing with emergencies, so they're the ones to look to when you're having trouble. When I worked on the trail project here with the American Conservation Crew, there was a number of days with red flag warnings, real close warnings. The fuel's dry. This is gonna happen. If you got a red flag and then you have wind and dry fuel, it's gonna get shut off. There's no question about it. I don't see any way around it with the way the climate is now. So there's also a good reason to vote for the hospital parcel tax so that we have that kind of resource here in town. Put a plug in for my friend Joshua Reimer. Also, Amy mentioned that she liked the Pledge of Allegiance because just for that time we were all on the same team. Well, in something like this, all our values and our ideology and stuff doesn't matter. All that matters is who you are. And so that's it's comforting to know that we can come to a baseline of being really human, and all this other stuff that we argue about usually will just melt away. And then I had to say about the banks, you know, that I recall Free Will and Franklin from Fat Freddy's Cat, who said that pot will get you through times of no money better than money will get you through times of no pot. So you want to stock up on your cannabis if there's no money. And then as far as you know, getting through this here, I was a wilderness trail crew leader for many years in backcountry sites across the country, and I found that attitude was the most important skill that people would have. I had Eagle Scouts, all kind of people show up. Those people were homesick, they couldn't do stuff, and it was the person who didn't know anything who came through with a good attitude. So it's the attitude that really matters with all this stuff, and that's something to cultivate. And I think this was a really good presentation, and it helped to jog my memory about some things that I might want. And you know, the trouble is that we're all so tech dependent that you know, we lived for millions of years without any of this electric, and now nobody knows what to do. So there's a kind of wake-up call for, I only got 3 seconds left. I say with the garage door opener, there's a string on it, so you just pull it down, and then you pull up the garage door. Go camping and work on your self-reliance skills, and you'll be all right.
I can only recommend for anyone out there to go through the SCOPE program with their neighborhood. Just do it. Call the fire department, set up a meeting, spend a Saturday afternoon with your neighbors, have a barbecue after, and you'll feel a lot better. We did it in our little neighborhood. 60 people know each other really well. We already did. But now we know each other better, and we know who needs what and who's going to do what. And so I can only recommend that to any person who lives in a community as small as this, to get to know your neighbor and support them. There's also another little device that people may want to consider. It's called a Garmin InReach. It's actually a satellite communicator. It lets people know where you are exactly via GPS, and you can communicate via satellite by primitive texting, but it will Bluetooth to your cell phone. It has a cost of about $450. It's expensive. It has an annual subscription cost of about $20, and you can monthly subscribe. So if you are in the predicament of 48 hours of notice, you can subscribe immediately for a month for $33, and you can shut it off at the end of the month. But it'll let anyone know where you are, and you can communicate with anyone to let them know that you're okay. It's something that we have for remote camping, but it actually, I bought it for that one purpose, but it's actually serves in many other ways, and it's a confident building thing. In case of an emergency, there's a way to communicate with people. If there was an earthquake, we could communicate with someone. Everything's knocked out, we could communicate with someone at a minute's notice that does have power and does have communication. They know what's going on. And then get your house prepared. Right.
Anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Councilmember Cook.
I'll make my comments really short, but I do want to thank city staff and even public and our consultant that came here. I think like Larry Barnett said, it's very important that we look at this, and you start thinking of a day without electricity. I grew up at the end of a PG&E line on Road F. They shut my power off for weeks and weeks, so we kind of learned, that you have natural gas. We didn't have water because we were on a well, but here in the city of Sonoma. So I think that what Mr. Willers was talking about with the SCOPE program, it is good to get to know your neighbors. There's a lot of RVs in this town. They have generators on them. They're like little houses. If there was an emergency like this, I would assume that our ordinances would be where we could be there for more than 3 days in the motorhomes. So it's things like that, but if you get to know your neighbor and you find those at-risk individuals and who has the motorhome, who has this and that, it'll just save everybody their life or even more. And as business owner, thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for working with this. I know during the fire it was a big thing for my company because we had a lot of employees sitting home being paid. We had clients' checks coming in, the mail had closed. Checks are still being written out to your employees, but money isn't coming back in. And, the fire was just a little area here. Most of these corporations, the banks, they don't care that you're not, they care when you don't put the money in there because they're going to bounce the checks. So there's a lot of things like that I think that I would like to talk to the federal government a little bit about how the mail service would be. Is that an air-conditioned building? Is there technology in there? Because for businesses, it's very important to keep your cash flow at those times. And everyone thinks that businesses have a lot of money, but they have a lot of money coming in and a lot of money going out. So a 3 to 4 day event could be catastrophic on your especially on your credit score.
So
Councilmember
the
Agrimonti.
last one, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much, Wayne, and I wanted to take a picture of you so people would know you when you get on site, but I didn't have a chance to do it. I didn't want to scare you, but thank you so much. There's so much work that goes into this, but the good news is we didn't have any of this when we had the last emergency in 2017, and for some reason restaurants were feeding people at 2 a.m. You know, visitors were walking with their suitcases to ramekins to get fed at 2 and 3 a.m. We all saw all of that. So this is a great community, and boy, I tell you, everybody comes to help. So I'm really happy. But now this gives us some a toolbox to be able to pull these things from. So I really appreciate it. I think, I think we'll be fine. That's how I look at live. Thanks.
Councilmember Hundley.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just a few comments because a lot has been said. First and foremost, thank you to everyone who's been involved. I am utterly impressed by just all the vast amount of things that have been thought about so far, and I know that there's still things left on the list to think about and try to figure out. But I feel a little more comfortable just knowing how thoughtful everyone is being. And I do think that I think there's a lot more preparing to do, and I think a lot of this responsibility is also on us as community members because, we have to talk to our friends and family. And I've discovered that, even though this has been in the news for a while, people, even as recent as this weekend, it's like as soon as they realize the potential extent of it, then suddenly people are very interested and they're wondering why they didn't hear about it before. So it's out there, but it's not reaching everybody, and so it's just something to bring up, everywhere you go, in the grocery store, guy behind you, hey, you saving up for that public safety power shutoff? And it's an opportunity to spread the gospel. But and I also the whole point about the neighbors, especially with this landline situation, because I don't have one, but I've been trying to track down the closest one to my house. It just seems like something that I should know anyway, and I think this could really bring my street together. I know there are streets that have the call lists and phone trees, and they had their queue parties and things, and my street is trying to be like that. We're just not there yet. And the other thing was just to put on the list of potential things is some sort of once all of these different protocol locations, especially for if worst case scenarios like fridge magnets or some sort of, people had said little things to pass out, but I just think something to have just to maybe remind people, turn on your radio or something like that. And then also these NOAA radios, which are amazing, and people out here just aren't familiar with them. But so do people have to order them off of Amazon or anywhere local going to be providing these?
I think, yeah, Dave Jeffries helped us pick this out. I think they were $25-$30 on Amazon.
It'd be cool if, I don't know, if maybe we could talk to somebody, Friedman, somebody perhaps, and then we could have a big push to try to get them from somewhere local, because, I honestly don't even have a battery-powered radio, and I went through the fires, so people, even though they know they should have something, it's so easy not to do it. And this is very helpful. I've been woken up many a night in the middle of the night by this, telling me there's a tornado coming. So, thank you all.
Well, I just really want to thank staff. I think that I really do think that Sonoma's been a leader on this, and we first heard about these power safety shutoffs only a couple months ago, and to have such a, comprehensive program in place, or, getting there is really impressive. And I've actually heard, just being out in the other communities, a real appreciation for this council and for this staff, and for you specifically, Kathy, because I think you've also been helping other communities get prepared, and I think that's wonderful. This is a really, really serious issue, and one that we need to be focused on. And I think Rachel's, Councilmember Hundley is 100% correct that the message hasn't quite reached people. I'm a little nervous that it's going to take one of these events happening for people to really get what it means to not have power for 3 or 4 days. I definitely have been making steps to prepare myself, but don't feel that I'm fully comfortable that I'm prepared. So something I'm going to, be pushing as well. These are events that are going to be really serious and ongoing and probably more frequent as climate change continues to raise its head and get worse in the valley. And so I'm glad to see that we have some good short-term quick fix solutions, and we're building some longer-term solutions as well. So that's really good to see. Happy to approve. I'm definitely going to be voting in support of the funding that you've requested. I think that that's really important that we do. I would like to see the addition of the masks and things like that for emergency supplies. I think that's super important in case we do have another fire, which I'm sure will occur at some point. As far as food and other things like that, I think the community has shown an ability to be pretty reliable to be generous on that, but definitely reflect other council members' comments as far as getting to know your neighbors, getting to know other people, share a pizza with them. Yeah, there you go. So what do you need for us as far as a motion? Okay.
Yes, I need a motion to approve the resolution with the attachment, which then will allow us to pull money from reserves as we need.
I'll make a motion for the resolution with the attachment.
Second.
Can we get a roll call vote?
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey. Thank
Yes.
you. The motion carries 4001 with Mayor Harrington absent.
And then I think we're going to be pushing item 6.3 to the next meeting.
Yes, so 6.3 was a review of our audit, and based on Mayor Harrington not having to leave, we were able to caucus offline with the auditor, and she can come back to the 16th, September 16th meeting, so we'll reschedule.
Do we need a motion to continue that? Nope. No. Okay. So on to item 6.7, consideration, discussion, and possible action to make an appointment of the non-voting youth member to the Community Service and Environment Commission, CSEC, City Clerk.
Yes, so in 2018, the City Council created a non-voting youth member for the Community Services Environment Commission. The first individual that you appointed was Jacqueline Torres, who successfully completed her term, and my understanding is that she did very well. It was a very successful addition to the commission. That being said, her term did end on July 31st, and so per your appointment process, the appointment will be done as a majority vote by the council. So we'll take a nomination and then go through that process. So we don't do like a certain order, that type of thing on these ones. Nomination, before we go there, Councilmember Agrimonti, if you will, I did want to let you know we did receive 4 applications: Emma Gallagher, Hamina Hechevarria, Shelby Amaya, and Twyla Summers. Unfortunately, I was not able to confirm the eligibility of Emma Gallagher. I did reach out to her on multiple occasions and avenues with no response. So I can't confirm that she is eligible. So at this time, if you would like to have any questions.
Is this like a normal item, or we have to go to public comment?
It has to go to public comment.
Just wondering.
One thing, just something that I noticed in this process, and we can't really discuss it tonight, but I did want to bring it to your attention. When you originally set the term for this position, you set it from August 1 to July 31. And I've noticed in both of the rounds of recruitment that we've done, we've actually had to change that, do the recruitment a little differently, because I think it's because students are on vacation, either they're completely out of school, well, they're either out of this area. So we may want to look at bringing back a later time consideration to make a change to the policy to change that term, possibly from September 1 to August 30th. So, and with that, no, not for tonight because it's not on the agenda, but it's something that I'm just bringing to your attention that I've experienced.
I'll bring us out to public comment. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for council member comments. Councilmember Hundley.
Well, I think all of these applicants look very well qualified, and I would be proud to support any of them, but the nomination I would make would be Shelby Amaya.
Mine would be Yamena Echeverra.
Oh, this is going well.
They're having a conversation at this point.
Well, I know that I was very impressed by Twyla.
That's who I was going to say, Madeline, so thank you for taking that.
Twyla, just because, you know,
Councilmember Agrimonti, can you use your microphone?
oh, sorry, just because of this, her experience beyond her school experience, each one of them are wonderful candidates. It's just, I was impressed with her overall.
I could support Twyla also.
I'll second that if that's a motion.
Oh, I'll move a motion, yes, I'd like to make a motion to accept Twyla.
Have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Hundley, I'm sorry. And Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion
And I would
carries
just like to add, these are all
4001.
wonderful students. We're very lucky for them to even approach, look at something like this, so thank you to all. Are we done?
I'm not used to doing these things. Okay, so are there any council member reports or comments? Okay, city manager report?
I don't have a report. I do, I've placed on the agenda to have the council appoint an ad hoc subcommittee. One of the things to focus on, kind of this facility, as council knows, we put some money in the budget to look at either some painting, staining, new photos, also the closed session conference room to look at some furniture, maybe some technology. So because this is your space, it would be helpful to have a council subcommittee to work with us as we
You're gonna do it?
as we look at this. So the question is if there's two council members who would like to work.
Well, this is a wonderful idea. I know that I've sort of been working on this for a few months. I took Vice Mayor Harvey to the hospital to see the photographs, to see the quality of photographs that are available. And so I know that I appreciate the time our city clerk, Rebecca Barr, has put into this. And so I would like to be on this ad hoc committee, and I would enjoy working with anyone here.
I would love to join Councilmember Agrimonti on the committee. Maybe we could take another tour of the hospital.
We did.
Take another one.
Oh, all right.
And I would like to make a motion that the subcommittee be Madeline, Councilmember Agrimonti, and Vice Mayor Harvey.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 4001.
Gavel. City attorney?
No comments.
Sweet. What do I say now?
Are we going into?
You need to do closed session, we need to do public comment on closed session. So this is a
Okay.
closed session on labor negotiations, and so if, Vice Mayor Harvey, you'd like to take it out to public comment?
Public comment on closed session. Sue, no? All right, seeing none, bring it back to council and we'll move into closed session.
Yes, and just for, we do not expect any formal, there will not be a formal announcement afterwards.